Отвечаю. А у нас опять одна водка.
В далекие времена был у долговцев генерал один сумасшедший. Постоянно орал по громкой связи и клоунаду на построениях устраивал. В итоге где-то в Лиманске пропал со своей группой. Следующая песня для пропащих.
You say, oh my God, the whole thing's going under. I mean, there are facts that we must face that about ecology that are so horrible. I mean, it's getting clear now that the problem isn't going to be energy, the problem is going to be food. And that, like, within 10 years, billions of people are going to die of starvation. Even if everybody shares everything, theoretically. And it's very hard when the intensity of the game gets so high, when there's so much energy in the system, not to get caught in the good and evil polarity, because it's finding each of our prices. I mean, each man has a price, or each woman has a price. And when the thing gets too heavy, like when the police state gets too oppressive, people get caught in being angry. When your buddies go to prison, like two of my friends just went to prison for 15 and 20 years for manufacturing LSD, supposedly. And it's hard not to get into why that judge, I'd like to, I'm going to send him a hate letter. Or at a more conscious level, getting into, well, I'm going to become a candidate for, and I'm going to be involved in local politics and start to change the game. Now, that may be beautiful or it may be horrible, depending on where you're doing it from. If you're doing it out of anger or out of being caught in the polarity, you're just perpetuating the horrible melodrama. The game only gets harmonious at the point where, though we play with full involvement, we are sitting totally behind it, ever present, with no attachment. Total involvement, but no attachment. Like, one of the conclusions of the ecological predicament is local gardens and local government. And I can imagine myself being involved in the next few years in finding a way to grow a garden and to become involved in the local scene. Now, I'm doing this not because, and this is a very tricky point about what's called the Bodhisattva vow. I'm doing this not because I think good is going to prevail, or that it must prevail. Because to me, all of the forces are manifestations of the face of God. But I'm doing it because that's what I do. That's my part in it. Now we're coming to the meaning of the term Dharma. Because to hear your Dharma means to hear what part you play in the total panoramic vision of the way in which the universe is. If those of you that have read the Bhagavad Gita, here is Arjuna, who's a really nice guy. Arjuna is a good family man. He's a good warrior. He's a really good guy, and he fights for right. And he's about to start this battle, and he's sitting with Krishna, who happens to be his charioteer and also happens to be God. And he looks at the other side of who he's going to fight, and he says, oh, he throws down his spear, and he says, I'm not going to fight. He says, because for me to fight would mean that I have to go against every single thing I believe. Because I would be killing my aunts, my uncles, and my teachers, and all my friends, because the other side are full of good people, too. I'm not going to fight Krishna. I don't care. I'm giving up. Because even if I win, this thing will be so drenched in blood, the whole family structure will be destroyed. Everything that ever meant anything to me will be gone. And Krishna says to him, which is the rest of the Gita, hey man, you don't have any choice. And then Krishna shows him how, in effect, it's all happened already. Because Krishna gives him the vision to see the future as well as the present. And Krishna shows him who Krishna is, and manifests at one point as this huge open jaw in which the warriors are crushing in, and their heads are getting crushed against his teeth, which in Hinduism is called the Shiva aspect. And here he's saying to Arjuna, you are going to have to be an instrument of the Shiva aspect of God. That is, you're going to have to be an instrument of the destructive component of the whole thing. Because if you look at nature, you will notice in nature, things are created, they are preserved, and then they destroy. Stuff grows, it flowers, and it rots. All of us are born, we grow up, we get old, sick, and weak, and we die. Not far out. I mean, if it's all so beautiful, you realize that the last quarter of almost everybody's life is in pain, in fear, in suffering, and in horror. That was Buddha's point in his Four Noble Truths. Is that godless? Is there no plan? Is it total randomness? What's the story? Now, if you can recognize all these different aspects of the dance, it's like, I'm not saying, there's an interesting thing. In the Ramayana, the story of Ram, Ram does battle with Ravana, who's the bad guy. Ravana is a lot like Nixon was at the moment of his last election, right? Landslide victory. He's the king. He's 4 more years, right? And he says, I was talking to Trisha, and she said, Daddy, isn't it too bad? This will be your last campaign. And everybody shouted, no, no, no. And he was sitting there, having made it. And he had, in Ravana's case, Ravana has 10 heads. And they're all ego. And Ravana says, I am the ruler of all the worlds. Look on my works, ye mighty, in despair. That's Ozymandias' line, but it's the same, roughly the same one. And he's so scary that everybody's afraid of him. And he gets so pompous that he decides to rip off Ram's wife, God's wife. He's going to get the Shakti of the universe. So he steals Sita, the wife, and he takes her to his island and he says, okay, I want you to make it with me. It's God's wife now. And she says, over my dead body. She says, you're nothing but a firefly compared to the sun. What are you kidding me? She says, cut off my head with your knife. That's the closest you're going to get to me. Because once you've made it with God, all the rest is kind of irrelevant. That's what a lot of us are finding, you see. That's our predicament. We try to make it real, but it doesn't quite come off. Now, the interesting aside about Ravana is that Ravana was actually a very high yogi in his previous birth. But he had a little heavy work to finish off. So he became Ravana. But he was due to be fully enlightened in this birth, which was going to happen by being killed by God. Because if you get killed by God, you get fully enlightened. Right? Hear that? In other words, they said to him, okay, Ravana, we got this heavy part. You've got to play Iago. See? And, Jesus, I played that last week. You've got to play it again. See, but it's okay, because if you do that, you're going to get a roll. Now, who takes an interesting question, see? I mean, which angle do you look from? See? At one level, it's a tremendously poignant predicament. It is what is known as heavy karma. Very, very, just about the heavy, I mean, Vietnam is about the heaviest karma that man could have. Now, whether or not you are perpetuating the same karma is determined by how you act you're being like it. Because Nixon, Richard Milhouse Nixon, is a package. And in that package is another being just like you and just like me. That far out? It's sitting back in there and it's screaming, here I am, but nobody's listening, including the package. I did a television show about a year ago in New York with Ultraviolet, who used to be with Andy Warhol. And Ultra and I guess you call her Ultra, we're talking about this issue, and we decided we really had to. I said the only way you could free Nixon to become compassionate was to look behind the mask to the being back there and make contact with that being without demanding he be other than he is, because he's really just playing his part in the drama. And then he's free to change. But the minute you treat somebody in terms of their role, you lock them into their role and they can't change. So the game is to look behind it. So we were trying to look into the television camera and look behind the Richard Nixon that we both were very upset about, and look back and say, we love you, Richard. And I said, Ultra, I don't hear the feeling in your voice. Let's try it again. Now, I don't want Nixon's part. I don't even want my part. I mean, all parts are just parts. But what the Dharma means is that you hear quietly, as you quiet down, you begin to hear what your part is in the whole operation. And you begin to play it not out of a self-conscious, I think I'll do this now, but just because it feels Taoist, it feels harmonious, it feels in the flow. So that one woman will say, I'm not going to have children, and when she says it, it feels just like the Earth Mother speaking, and another one says, I'm not going to have children, and you just hear hysteria. Somebody else says, my work is to have children, and you feel right on, and somebody else says, my work is to have children, and it feels weird. Because there is no form, there is no single form, there's no holy trip. You can't be like Buddha or be like Christ. That isn't the game. The game is to be what you need to be, which is follow your natural course, but do it with the space, the inner space that's quiet enough to hear what your natural course is, not head trip your way into it. Because every time you head trip your way into it, you keep alienating yourself from it. Don Juan says, it is the art of a warrior to balance the terror of being a man with the wonder of being a man and a woman. That as you provide space inside, which comes through meditation, it comes through mantra, it comes through devotion, it comes through whatever your, quote, yogic technique is. Once there's that little space, you begin to be awed at the total exquisiteness of the design of it all. And you begin to see what would be called the awful compassion of it. When you get behind your own romanticizing of your life and everybody else's life, you merely see the unfolding of the laws of the universe, and you see layer upon layer, each more awesome than the last, until when you're back here, every pebble and every form on this plane becomes some kind of pure spirit being manifested, and it's just awful. It's full of awe. And the terror of it is you also look at the total impersonality of it. And that it may well be that we are in the Kali Yuga, and that we are just before the Pralaya, and at some moment the whole thing is going to go up. And this is all going to be over just like that. And when it's all over, he will all say, and we'll say, wasn't that one? Boy, that's got the Exorcist. That really took me on a trip. I really thought it was real. But knowing that cute up level there's no way you can drop out of this round. You can't drop out. That's the 403. Try it. What are you going to do? Well, won't do anything. Well, that's an interesting thing to do. Then what are you going to do? Because there isn't any way to drop out. All you can do is be quiet enough to hear on every plane what your part is and play it with compassion and with love and with openness and with humanity. Now, I'm dealing with people these days like Trungpa Rinpoche, who comes drunk to his lectures, screws all his devotees. He's a wild man. He's a great lama. You know, either he's a total Meshuggah, or he's an exquisite statement of Dorje Trollo, of one of the faces of Padmasambhava, which is the angry deity who is the compassion to cut through all of our stuff. Because what other holy man do you know that comes drunk to his lectures and screws all his women's devotees? Well, most of them, no. See, a question, is he pure? Far out. Could it be? I mean, could it be? Or is that, no, doesn't fit into my rule book of gurus. There's nothing even under subcategory C that allows for that. It must be the work of the devil. Now, what's happened in the training that I've been subjected to, which has involved coming into contact with a number of people who have great powers and who reflect very different aspects of the dance than the aspect that is whatever my Dharma is. Those of you that are familiar with Alice Bailey and the Theosophists are familiar with the concept of rays. Or we could talk about archetypes. Like on this plane, or if you like astral signs, how about those, 12 astral signs? Like on this plane, there are all of us, and every single one of us has a different thumbprint, has some unique individuality. But we can say, people come up to me and say, I bet you're an Aries. And I say, yes. And they say, I knew it. It's like the old psychology days when somebody says, I bet you're a high PD, low HY on the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. And on the astral planes, each of us have our identities also. And what the transformations that occur in most of us are that we start to divest our attached emotional romantic involvement in this particular package. Now, at first, we might buy into a Buddhist thing at the wrong level and say, it's all void, it's nothing. Okay? Which is just another place, by the way. It's not that either. And in order to extricate ourselves from the somethingness, we try to attach ourselves to nothingness, which then becomes something. But as we extract ourselves from so much identity with being Sam, Frida, Joan, or Mary, we begin to recognize that we are being transformed, if you will, into our archetypal selves. If you look at the pyramid, the one on the top, then it goes into the two, the yin and the yang, and then it starts to go into the 3, 5, 7, 9, 12, bloop, 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 till it gets to us. And every one of us is one of those rays going all the way back to the yin-yang and back to the one. Now, my training from my guru is sub-ek, meaning it's all one. Sub-ek, there's only one. Meaning keep your eye on the top of the pyramid. Don't get caught in the astral melodrama. And by keeping your eye on the top of the mark, of the point up there, the peak, and cleaning away all the stuff by purification, by calming, by centering, by being honest with yourself when you're done with stuff, by running through your trips consciously, all this stuff, as you sort of lighten and let go, you're aiming towards the one, and you're slowly merging into this one. But in the course of it, you're going to not go through all of these different paths, you're going to go through one of these paths. And these paths aren't just practices, they are actually identities. And so you're going to find you are on the Christ trip, or you are on the Shiva trip. And those are very different aspects. They're different rays. And the interesting training that I've been finding myself subjected to is coming in contact with very, very evolved beings who represent different rays than the one I do. And finding the seductiveness of that ray, and then going in under it, and then feeling, no, it's not right in my heart, and then feeling I've got to pull back and find my own way. Now, that's what I would call taking teachings instead of getting hung up about a teacher. That is, each of us has work to do, like, to the extent that you're afraid of chaos, to the extent that you're afraid of death, to the extent that you're afraid of pain and suffering, you've got work to do. One of the things I do, for example, is I sit with people that are dying. And that really, they teach me a hell of a lot. Or I'm with somebody who, when somebody dies, they say, well, that was interesting. Like Maharaji laughing. I mean, my guru laughed at death? Somebody he loved and loved him? Like I was getting all involved in setting up these centers for dying. That is, trying to create spaces where people could consciously come to die. And recently I was in retreat for 7 weeks out in the desert. I went out in my VW bus and I camped out in the desert by myself. And I just, because doing this and interacting when you're just somebody else on the path, you pick up a lot of stuff along the way. And then you got to quiet down to reconnect. For me, I do anyway. And so I needed to go off in the desert for a while. And when I got quieter, I heard, cool it, don't rush so fast into that, you're not ready. You're not ready because you're still got stuff to do about dying yourself. And if I've still got stuff to do about dying and I go create huge superstructures to help people die, all I'm doing is creating superstructures of illusion. Because no matter how subtle it is, all I'm transmitting is my own fear. Because the funny thing is, you transmit to other people not all the nice words you say, but your own being, whatever that is. And you could be a bus driver and just handing the change, and you're transmitting the Buddha nature. I mean, I went into a restaurant, and I was served by somebody who was so beautiful that I just felt like I had been in the presence of a saintly being. I just got suddenly energy poured into me from this being, and all the being was doing was pouring me a cup of coffee. And all I said was thank you, and here's 15 cents, and thank you, and I went and sat down. There was no more, there wasn't, you're Buddha. I know who you are, don't kid me.
Че у меня в сапоге? Опять жучара какой-то. Твою ж налево. Это че у меня на комбезе дырка? Чёртовы тушканы.
So that listening is to listen to hear what part you're playing. And I have met so many beings, like my relations with Tim Leary were an example of somebody who I worked with for many years who represented a different ray than I do. If you read Terror 2, his new book, you will see that he speaks about different stuff than I do. That doesn't mean one of us is a bad guy. It merely means we represent different aspects of the dance. And then you have to listen into your heart about what your work is with somebody who is in a different aspect. Sometimes you have work to do because you're freaked by that aspect. And if you're busy being attached by wanting it or wanting to get rid of it, you got work to do. And sometimes you can look at a different aspect and say, I honor you, I love you, you do your work, I do my work, and it's okay. There's no attachment, there's no clinging. To look at the universe and see all of the forces, the heavy ones, the light ones, the destructive ones, the creative ones, to find what your part is in it, and if your part is that of the Bodhisattva, that of reducing the suffering of all human beings, and that's all your work is. You just do it and do it and do it until there is no you in there. There is merely this instrument for the relieving of suffering of all beings, and that is one of the parts of the dance, of which another and equally important of the dance is that which creates all the suffering in the universe. That's what's so far out about it. See, there's a very complex, like the other day I went hang flying, what's it called, hang sailing? With Stuart Brand. He took me out, and I'm still all black and blue from my attempt to become a bird. But it was something. What it was, I don't know. But now, when Stuart and I spend time together, we're very fond of one another. And I really just went out to be with Stuart for the day, because I really dig Stuart. Stuart is really what would be called a utopianist. And I am what you might call a mystic. Stuart, as represented in the Whole Earth catalog, and now his new venture, called the Coevolution Quarterly, is working full-time to make it beautiful now for everybody. That's the game. And I said to him, well, Stuart, do you care that it be beautiful for everyone now? And he said, yes. And I said, well, there's the problem. Not that you do it. I mean, I dig being a utopianist, but without attachment. See, the predicament of having the inner strength and the inner courage, and this is the thing Don Juan's talking about, the ability to see the horror of it, the terror of it, to see the forces equal and opposite always, and realize, as Buddha pointed out, that as long as this plane exists, which has on it people who desire anything, there will be suffering. And at the same time, to work full-time for a utopian existence, for a place where there is no suffering. See, there's the place where it comes together, where you work full-time to end suffering, knowing damn well the suffering's going to continue. Without getting disillusioned, because you've already been through that. Because, as the Gita says, you are not attached to your goals. You are merely doing it as an offering to God, because that's your part in the dance of making God manifest on earth. And that's what it's about. I just spent 3 days with Wavy Gravy, who's a very dear friend. And Wavy said to me, I was having Wavy read the third Chinese patriarch, which tells you not to be attached, and not to be attached to not being attached, and so on. And Wavy says, well, can I care? Can I choose to choose? Can I choose to care? I said, not the way you're saying it, Wavy. Like when you meet another person who has given space to it all, you meet them and they might be in the middle, you might be at the moment, like in the middle of sandbagging a dike to keep the waves from crashing in at a moment of incredible crisis. And you look into their eyes and they are totally right here, empty, compassionate, loving, full, nothing. Oh, you here? I'm here. Far out. You don't even stop in midstream. The sandbags are going, but the eyes meet and it's nothing. And that's the quality of my relation with Trungpa Rinpoche. He's doing this dance that, my God, he's practically eating burning swords. But when I look in his eyes, there's, you here, I'm here, far out. You know, and then whoosh. I mean, he freaks me completely at that level. And there I am being freaked, and he's freaking me, and we look at each other, and I, far out. You here? I'm here. Far out. I'm freaked, right. I'm freaking, right. And here we are. most of us have gone through realizing that we were connected to a dance that was much more than we had been led to believe that life was about, which made us grab at and cling to a lot of models that were available, many of which came from the East. And then very slowly we have been developing our own models, or buying from the East that which is usable and rejecting that which isn't, or getting to the point where we realized that we had to just get our scene together. And so many of us are just getting our scenes together. And we got wholly too fast. We got into Zumbek's suit. And then we have to go back, and we go back, and suddenly you look at somebody who was all in white, being a vegetarian wisp of light, and you find them in a bar with you drinking and eating a steak. Okay? And they look at you, and there's a slight defiant look and a slight, it's like... See, the first time I decided that I had been a little phony holy, I noticed that I still was craving foods that I wasn't supposed to eat. So I remember the first time I decided, look, what am I, afraid of the devil? Like, what I've done is I've been vegetarian for 6 years, and I'm busy with, like, marks on my sleeve. I'm a 6-year vegetarian. How long have you been a vegetarian? So I decided, well, the hell with this, I've just got to break my own record so I can get on with it, So I went into a Chinese restaurant, and I picked a very out-of-the-way one with a dark light, And I went and I decided I'll really go whole hog because I'm a Jew and a Hindu. I'll order spirits because that really does it at all levels. And if God's going to strike me dead, he'll do it right in this Chinese restaurant, and the whole thing will be over. So I sit down and I start to eat my spirits, which I'm enjoying thoroughly. I've offered them to Maharaji, by the way. I say, Maharaji, I know you'll find this strange. And then I crack up completely. Since he is the spare ribs and me eating them too, so there's many levels of humor in that whole. And you're only eating yourself, and the whole thing is bizarre. There's a guy at the next booth, and he's in a suit and a tie, and he's just finishing his lunch, and he's facing me in the next booth, and I bless the food, I'm holding the plate of spare ribs and offering them to God, and he watches this whole thing, and then I eat, and then afterwards he says, excuse me, could I come over and talk to you? And I finished my spare ribs, and I said, certainly. And he comes over, he sits down, and he says, I'm a salesman for an electronics equipment company from MIT, and, he said, I couldn't help noticing the way you offered the food. He said, the spirit was so powerful, it affected me tremendously. And he said, I just wanted to come over to share with you a moment of the spirit and to thank you for doing that. So it turned out that he was a fundamentalist Christian, and we had a long talk about Christ and the Bible, and he was telling me about how at times he's kind of hypocritical. He'll be in a bar, and there'll be a beautiful girl, and he'll talk to her, and she'll be upset, and he'll say, well, let me talk to you about the Bible, and really he wants to make it with her, and we were going through all that stuff, which everybody goes through, I'm sure. I mean, we all deal with that stuff. See, it's all got to be out front. I mean, there's no... Who are you going to hide from? You're all the guru. What the hell? So finally, he says, well, we would talk for about an hour, and he says, this has been a thrilling conversation. He says, I just feel so honored having met you. Could you tell me one thing? Could you tell me what you eat? What's your diet? Okay. And I look down, and there's a big pile of bones. Now, you see, it's very complicated about diet because there are stages, like if you're trying to do, say, Kundalini Yoga, you've got to watch every morsel that goes into your mouth, because if you try to do pranayama and you don't be very careful about your diet, you're really going to blow your scene. of your body, of this incarnation. So that when you're doing certain kinds of yoga, certain kinds of sadhana, certain diets are required. Also, at certain places, you get, like through meditation, you get to a very delicate space where everything you put into your body, you'll really recognize that state that you are releasing, and you'll notice the vibration of animals that have died violently in your body. Then there are other times when your stage is different. I mean, like, it is very clear, like, Tibetans have always eaten meat, and they're certainly as high as anybody else I know. Now, you say, well, they had to eat meat because they were up in the mountains, but meat is meat. Now, all I'm saying is the diet, just like everything else, you've got to listen in your heart to hear what you particularly need as your sadhana. What we tended to do was get very fanatic about the diet and let all the rest go to hell. We got much more purist about our diet than we did about the rest of the game. And we've got to bring it all together. You can't have lustful sex and be a macrobiotic and think you're making it. See? The sex has to be as conscious as the rice you put in the pot. You put rice in the pot with mantra, and then a girl walks in the room and you know. And somehow that's off limits because it's not my diet, you know. Now, the predicament is that all of us are in transformation at this point. That's what you're doing here, I assume, unless you come here to bless us. Or unless you came in by mistake and you're sitting in the middle and you can't get out. Okay? Those are the three alternatives of what you're doing here, all right? And if you are in the process, along with the rest of us, and you are not, by definition, sitting in a cave in the Himalayas at this moment, you, like I, am dealing with the stuff of daily life in the marketplace. And the fire burns hot. Yeah, right. Right. And that's great, because the hotter the fire, the faster the purification. And the only fear you have is you're going to go under. But the fact is you can't go under. That's the one that's so far out. You can think you went under. You can really scare yourself. Oh, I went under. See? But in fact, if you give yourself that little space again, you come right back up again. And you'll see that that the fire is only really hot when you risk going under. You can protect your game. You can protect, it's like protect a small investment. Like I can sit up in a cave in the mountains, and I was sitting out in the desert, and I got so holy. I mean, the cactus were all luminous, and I was seeing visions clearly, and I saw how it all was, and I was totally non-attached, and I was full of love and compassion. It was all beautiful. And I saw a wolf, and I loved it, and the wolf loved me, and it was incredibly spacey. And boy, that's who I am. And then I started to drive from Arizona, and I did it slowly. I went to Joshua Tree for a couple of weeks slowly. Then I ended up coming through Los Angeles. But I didn't stop because that might have been a little heavy, so I kept right on going. And I came right up and I settled in the Bay Area, where it's all satsang, isn't it? And I think, oh, I can eat fire. I can handle all this. And yesterday, Krishna Das said to me, I think you ought to go off by yourself for a day. I said, you think I'm paranoid? He says, yeah, totally. So I did. I've just been in Samuel Taylor State Park overnight. Just came here from the park. I went to cool myself out so I could be here. Because yesterday I was... God says you should do it this way. Roughly, that's the way I was coming on. Now, even when you're in the middle of that hell, Loka, you know, here we are, like I could say to Krishna Das, do you think I'm paranoid? And he could say yes, and who's that talking to who? That's not paranoia. That's the other place. So it's okay. I mean, I'm not afraid I'm going under it all. The faith, see, that's the issue. The whole thing is Shraddha of faith. And at first, your faith is very flickery, so you keep needing your connection. You got to rush to the guru, or you got to have satsang, or you got to have a pure this, or a little picture, or run to your puja table, or do your arti every night, or whatever the trip is, or wear your medallion, or whatever the is. Up until then, you felt you're a schnook that's hanging on to this high thing by dear life, and you've gotten into the door by cheating somehow, and you're holding on, see? Isn't that true? I mean, am I talking the way you... And then this other space, you start to think, because all these books have been saying it. They keep saying, you are it. You say, and you look like they're talking to somebody behind you, you know? I'll tell him when he comes in, or, sorry to say that to him, but not to me. I know what a no-good Nick I am, you know? And then you begin to recognize, especially, or if you've had the opportunity to be around a being who is a pure mirror, that is a non-judgmental person, who you look at in the eyes and you can see that they see all your crap and they are all right here, and yeah, and here we are. It's that story which I've told before, but of the night when I was at the temple in Kenshi, and I thought about wanting to give money to a lama, and I just thought about it, and then I got into my sleeping bag. It was very cold, and I started to have all these sexual fantasies. And I had these fantasies of how I'd use my yogic powers for sexual conquest. And the fantasies were so intense that I ended up having an orgasm. And the next morning, I was called to my guru, who was 12 miles away. And I came up to him, and he looked at me, and he says, you want to give money to a lama? And I said, yes. He says, very good. And he hit me on the head, and he told everybody, and I was basking in all this. And then suddenly, I thought, holy mackerel. If he knows that, he knows that. And I couldn't look at him. And when I finally looked at him, he was just looking at me with total love and compassion. Right? Sure, and here we are. Okay? Because a person, a dispassionate person, can look at all the stuff of the universe and say yes. And there's none of your stuff, no matter what your stuff is, that is more than that. It's just more stuff. No, it's my stuff. I mean, you may think it's all stuff, but I haven't told you my stuff yet. Now, the next little flip that occurs once the faith starts to get stronger is you're willing to sit in the marketplace and roast, realizing that all that will burn away is what's burnable, and that who you are is not burnable, right? So that you're not vulnerable, and that's what Christ's message was. He says, go ahead, what are you going to do? Spit on me, laugh at me, jeer at me? What do you want to do, nail me up? Go ahead. That isn't who I am. Go ahead, make me happy, go ahead here. Father, forgive them. They don't know what the hell they're doing. Because Christ is reminding us. That's what he did. He reminded us that we aren't that which suffers. And that's the profound flip that occurs when you recognize that suffering is what you got a secret stash of attachment somewhere, or you wouldn't be suffering. No attachment, no suffering. You're only suffering because you think it ought to be other than the way it is. Now, it's all nice and easy to talk about that when the suffering's a little one. But like in dealing with Wavy has a spinal problem that keeps him in excruciating pain almost all the time. And that's tough sadhana to convert that pain. Physical pain, see, that's the one most people are afraid of. And that's where the dying fear is, the fear of pain. And I had this experience with this woman that was dying in Los Angeles, where I sat next to her. She was in the final stages of dying, really, from cancer of the nervous system. And it was all through her groin, all through her thighs and her stomach. And she was rubbing her legs with a look of excruciating pain on her face, as if she were experiencing that. And I just sat in front of her, and at first, because I've loved her and I've known her, I was going through all my emotional reactions to her pain. And then I quieted down and I did Buddhist cemetery meditation. That is, watching the decaying body and watching the pain and watching it all and sitting right with it and being quiet inside. And I got quieter and quieter because I was working, this is a tantric thing, I was working with the intense energy of that pain and my pity and converting that energy. So there was a tremendous amount in it. So as I got into this deep space, it got very, very deep and very quiet. And she all the time is writhing in pain, and she turns to me and she says, "I'm feeling so peaceful." She said, "I don't know what you're doing, but I just feel in total peace." And all the time, the body is writhing in pain, and the personality is struggling, and behind it we are. And there's no pain, and there's no suffering. And at that moment, she and I were the happiest beings in Los Angeles, I think. We were totally blissed out at that moment. The whole room was luminous, and we were just sitting together in this place of total peace, and all the time she was struggling with her body, but that wasn't who she was being. That was merely happening. In the same way your heart beats, but you're not beating your heart. So the process is taking the stuff of daily life and giving space to just how it is, and taking that energy and converting it and working with it, working with your desires, working with your fear, working with your loneliness. When you're lonely, instead of trying not to be lonely, be lonely. If you're depressed, far out, I'm depressed. Hell, isn't it? And here we are depressed. Wow. You know, I spent years trying to not be how I was. And in order to come to see you, I would have to take a lot of things in the men's room to get ready to be beautiful. Because, as simple as say, I was working out of a philosophy of poverty rather than of riches. Philosophy of riches says, I am what I am, and here it is, and here we all are, being just what we are, and it's enough. And when we'll be something else, we'll be something else, and that'll be fine too. Meaning giving space to your being as it is. Now, don't let what I'm saying imply that I'm against any kind of systems, methods, ashrams, gurus, yogas of any kind. These are all exquisite training fields, and I personally avail myself of many of them. I sit zazen in sesshin. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to be sitting in Southern Buddhist meditation for 10 or 12 days with many beings. I've been studied with many, many different yogic techniques. And I can understand the value of the Sufi dance and the Zen sitting and on and on and on. And they each have an exquisite function. And you've got to listen in your heart to find out whether that's right on for you. The proselytizing is impure when you come on that it's good for someone else. All you can say to someone else is listen to your heart. You'll know what's good for you.
This podcast is brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. We appreciate you listening, and we appreciate all the support that you've given us. Please continue that support and donate at ramdas.org. We can then continue to share what Ramdas has been sharing for all of these years. Thank you.
think I'd just bail here. Got a little bit of what I needed, but not a lot. Not hugely in love with the SKS either so far. Figured it'd be a little stronger than the SKU? Is that what I was using? Whatever, the SVD, whatever the other one was. This server is full. Okay. That was bullshit. I should have been paying attention, I guess, though. See if they put my backpack up for sale. If not, I'm gonna have to go do some more of that shit.
Твою ж налево. Это что у меня на комбезе дырка? Чёртова тушка. Покемарить, что ли? Или попозже? Отлить бы. Болты кончились. Мне бы их еще надо.
Ты видишь, ты знаешь, а я исчезаю. Ты дышишь, ты видишь, но не понимаешь.
Блин, мужики, я походу из дома в зону ушел и чайник забыл выключить. Жрать хочу.
Помню, группировка
Ну, как же
такая
консервы
была.
надоели?
Торговая
А
фирма.
батоны с колбасой
Хитрецы
хреновые нынче
невероятных
стали делать.
масштабов, конечно. При помощи денег и нечестных трюков держали в страхе всю зону, включая военных и монолитовцев.
Слезки с глаза капают, и ручьями бурными душеньку затапливаю. Час настал покаяться Господу, легче стало, что попросту и смириться с потерей нелегкою. Называли любовью ее, и никто не поможет нам справиться. На пороге стоит, не стесняется, в дом вошла пустота. Я один, ты одна, горьких слез океан.
Блин, мужики, я походу из дома в зону ушел и чайник забыл выключить.
Ветром мокрым, располовиненным прочь уносит все чувства невинные. Боль на сердце невыносимая растоптала грудь камнем невидимым. И никто не поможет мне справиться. Все в груди, как бы мне не расплавиться. В дом вошла пустота. Я один, ты одна, горьких слез океан затонул наш корабль.
Че у меня в сапоги? Опять шучара. Твою ж мать. Это че у меня на комбезе дырка? Чёртова тушка.
Снаружи холодная зона, и каждый из нас ищет способ согреться. Кто-то выбирает стаканчик беленькой, кто-то сидит у костра, кому-то по душе кутаться в уютный экзоскелет. Ну а
Бабы,
наше
конечно,
радио
грызутся,
предлагает вам
но
свой
не так,
рецепт
как эти.
– горячую
Вот так.
музыку.
Чей страх гуляет, бьется, грохочет, и ад
Хорошо живется.
бывает, и встречи не хочет. Чей смех боится спугнуть тех, кто рядом, и не пробиться ударным отрядом. Рай для тебя жди, и ты зря бездна моя, и сжигай меня. Чей
Че у
страх
меня в сапоги? Опять шучара.
гуляет, как бомбы грохочет, и сердце топчет, и снова хохочет. Рай для тебя ищи, и ты зря бездна моя, и сжигай тебя.
И плавили стекла, но все же дошел. Едва не дошел. Рай для тебя не жди.
Что-то...
Искры зря. Бездна моя, лети, сжигай себя. Рай для тебя не жди. Искры зря. Бездна моя, лети, сжигай себя. Рай для тебя. Рай для тебя.
Многие слушатели спрашивают, почему я назвал радиостанцию Green FM. Есть такое английское слово, и переводится оно как «увлекательное
Я на днях такой
времяпровождение».
артефакт нашел. За сколько бы его загнать? бы сейчас горячего. Однозначно таких я еще не встречал.
Свет можно просто потрогать рукой. Свет дарит радость и дарит покой.
Ой, что-то...
Свет — необъятная тайна миров. Свет — для него нет преграды оков. Свет — мы привыкли к его чудесам. Свет в разных красках нашим глазам.
Не могу.
Свет там, где свет и тепло и уют. Свет человеком надежный приют. Свет неизменный для
Жрать
добрых
хочу.
и
Ну
злых.
как же консервы надоели. А батоны с колбасой хреновые нынче стали делать.
Неделимо своих и чужих. Свет может сжечь всех, а может согреть. Свет, кому падать, кому-то лететь. Свет, жаль, что стал он привычкой для нас. Свет, у людей лозунг здесь и сейчас. Свет, только им привлекательней тьма. Свет, но согреть
Че у меня в сапоге?
способна
Опять же чара
она.
какая-то. Горизонт чист. Вздремнуть, что ли?
Свет, про него все не пересказать. Свет, мы не в силах ему указать. Свет, мирный свет на наших плечах. Свет, мирный свет в бесконечных лучах. Свет, как его нам отблагодарить.
Отлить бы.
Свет, мирным светом по миру разлит. Свет, как его нам отблагодарить?
Бабу.
Свет,
Бабы,
мирным
конечно,
светом
грызут,
по
но
миру
не так, как
разлит.
эти мутанты. Бабы, конечно,
Вову
грызут,
бы сейчас
но не
горячего.
так, как эти
А не эту
мутанты.
херню консервированную.
На севере зоны опять жарко. Все дерутся, воюют, а я в баре, тушенка и водочка. Эх, хорошо.
Ай-яй-яй-яй, да ну какая комета, когда воздуха нету в убитых легких на выдох. Ай-яй-яй-яй, горит огнями планета, замечательно где-то быть убитым.
Эх, скукотища.
Быть убитым на выбор. Идет голодная смерть, ногами топчет могилы, собирает алмазы, забирает невинных, с неба падает снег, в небе ангелы скрылись, нам на это плевать, мы вдвоем с тобой вскрылись. Ай-яй-яй-яй, да ну какая комета, когда воздуха нету в убитых легких на выдох. Ай-яй-яй-яй, горит огнями планета, замечательно где-то быть убитым на выбор. Быть убитым на выбор. Идет довольная смерть, летит небесный конвой. Мне ни о
Чё у
чем
меня в
не
сапоги?
жалеть,
Опять
пусть
жучара.
пожалеет живой, пускай закатит глаза и рвет на выдохе рот. Я никому не сказал, что этот мир нас не ждет.
болты кончились.
Ай-яй-яй-яй, да ну какая комета, когда
Блин, я так жрать хочу, что у меня желудок к позвоночнику летит.
легких на выдох. Ай-яй-яй-яй, горит огнями планета, замечательно где-то быть убитым на выбор. Быть убитым на выбор. Ай-яй-яй-яй, да ну какая комета, когда воздуха нету в убитых легких на выдох.
Черт, я свой комбез порвал.
Ай-яй-яй, горит огнями планета, замечательно где-то быть убитым на выбор.
Не каждая ходка складывается удачно, но такова жизнь. Только тот, кто познал горечь поражения, сможет по достоинству оценить сладость победы.
Горизонт
Следующая песня для
Вздремнуть,
тех,
что
кто
ли?
просрал свой хабар.
Сейчас бы кино какое глянуть. Интересно, что в киношках сейчас крутят?
Я знаю, какую мечту ты хранишь, что твою душу тревожит давно. Ты бы хотела поехать в Париж, представить тебя героиней кино. Гламур, Шанель и звезды в руках, ривьера, Прованс, лаванды в
Сейчас бы чай.
полях,
А у нас
любовь,
опять одного.
романтик и теплый закат, как нежные ноты в сердце звучат. Я знаю, как хочешь ты больше всего узреть красоту Елисейских полей. И может,
Блин, мужики, я походу из дома в зону ушел и чайник забыл
пройтись по
выключить.
следам величайших людей. Мамы, Сезам и Делакруа навечно писали на хрупких холстах. И каждый из нас сам себе режиссер, шатан, артизан, досан, банан. Дети бы нам
Блин, мужики, я походу походу из дома в зону ушел и чайник забыл выключить.
Парижем насладиться красотой ночных огней.
Болты кончились. Где бы их еще надумать?
Я знаю, что снится тебе по ночам, как море сбивает лазурь к берегам. Там, за Парижем, на белом песке, можно вино попивать в Сен-Тропе. Шатом, лагранж, домен еще прекрасно дополнят наш бастион. Мы будем летать, мы будем жить, мы будем с тобой этой ночью.
Ой, сейчас бы найти гору артефактов, да укатить из этой сраной зоны.
Выше полетать бы над Парижем, и в этом сне нам
Твою ж налево.
хочется
Это что у меня на комбезе дырка? Чёртовы тушканы.
нас будить совсем не нужно, прерывать над тем, что чуждо. Пусть будет бесконечно это сон.
Как там моя интересно. Не ушла еще в другом. Как думаешь? Интересно, как там сейчас дом?
Многие слушатели просили включить следующую композицию. Я, если честно, приколы не выкупаю, но все ради вас, ребята.
Снова снег обошел стороной, и на ветреных тучах уплыл засыпать
Горизонт чист.
севера.
Вздремнуть, что ли?
Мы придумаем лучшую сказку с тобой.
Сейчас бы чай, а у нас опять одного.
Сами выкрасим белые наши дома. Будет в небе сверкать за окном звездный дождь из летящих на счастье хрустальных комет. И придет Новый год к нам пушистым котом. Мы камины затопим, зажжем в доме свет. И нарядим лозу виноградную елку, бутафорскую
Мутанты
хвою
говорят, опять болты
повесим
ночью зашли.
шары.
Где бы их еще надыбать?
Ночь накинет на плечи нарядного шелку и завяжет шарфы из цветной мишуры. Будет в небе сверкать за окном звездный дождь из летящих на счастье хрустальных комет. И придет Новый год нам пушистым котом. Мы камины затопим, зажжем в доме
Сейчас бы чай,
свет.
а у нас опять одна водка. Черт, я свой комбез порвал.
Вернется на юг непременно в сочельник. Щедро высыплет всем из большого мешка своей снежной муки, словно сказочный мельник.
Че у меня в сапоге?
На пирог
Опять
для
шишак.
хозяев в канун Рождества будет в небе сверкать за окном звездный дождь из летящих на счастье хрустальных комет. И придет Новый год к нам пушистым котом. Мы камины затопим, зажжем в доме свет.
Твою ж налево. Это че у меня на комбезе дырка? Чертовы тушканы. Че у меня в сапоге? Опять жучара какой-то.
В эфире Гринт ФМ. С вами Архон Зуза и кислотный дракон. Влад, не стесняйся, пусть тебе тоже немного славы достанется. Следующая песня для всех драконов зоны.
Как там вот сейчас бы найти гору артефактов, не ушла к другому, а? Как думаешь? Че у меня в сапоге? Опять жучара какой-то. Блин, мужики, я походу из дома в зону ушел и чайник забыл выключить. Лову бы сейчас горячего, а не эту херню консервированную. Ой, что-то прям не могу. Бабы, конечно, грызут, но не так, как эти мутанты.
как не относился к бандитам, но именно среди них я встречал самых милашных персонажей. Чего только один Толян стоит. Следующая песня для Толяна.
Сейчас бы кино какое глянуть. Интересно, что в киношках сейчас крутят?
Манили вкус рукой до неба, достать пытались яркую звезду, и обещаний горы лилий несметно, хоть и не в райском, но саду. Мараем мы годами в саже чистейший аромат души, лишь благозвучием наполнив пассаж стремительной судьбы. Погода, вспомнив, было лето, прогрев воздушный поцелуй, я посылаю удивленным толпе прохожих, это ты.
Жрать хочу. Ну как же консервы надоели? А батоны с колбасой хреновые нынче стали делать.
Так случайно разойтись, и даже если не встречались, не отражаясь блески глаз. А никакого цвета жизни прожить без нас и не узнав моменты радости на солнце, там, говорят, пятнает высь. И глубина столетий за секунду прочувствую разницу на вкус, губами чучики касаясь, и целомудренный экстаз. И птицы клином улетали, сентябрь дышит спину нам, и календарь краснею даты, смущенно зоры потупив. Мы так стояли в эпицентре, и даже слов не говоря, руки протягивая к сердцу, и откровенно затянув.
Горизонт чист. Вздремнуть, что
Во
ли?
временных, запутавшись без рамок, даря улыбку каждый день. Давай до скорых встреч, ты знаешь, и хоть десяток лет пройдет. Найдешь меня на этом месте самом, я навсегда с тобой. И ты, пожалуйста.
Я, кажется, спину потянул. Болит, блин.
Мир в страдании, друзья, а война в удовольствии. Следующая песня для всех, кто сейчас попал в перестрелку.
Кто станет звездою, зайдем на лифт. Текстами и драйвом пробьем зловещий. И ноты в сеть, октавная сметь, давай пожигай и фаером жечь. Предела их нету в твоей голове, разрушен преграды, не зашены боль. Особая метка, 8-я.
Я на днях такой артефакт нашел. За сколько бы его загнать?
Вокруг миражи,
Однозначно, сейчас бы кино какое глянуть. Интересно, что в киношках сейчас крутят?
И стоя лицом туда в неизвестность, и время схоронит, от страха излечит. Пассивная жажда спасаться и верить, несущему весть никто не ответит.
Мутанты, говорят, опять кого-то ночью утащили.
И лучше безумие, чем социум грязный. Отбросить в мире живые маски. И вот ты на сцене, и дома в порыве, бой твой по струнам,
Горизонт
кричи
чист.
от мира.
Вздремнуть, что ли?
Все вдруг не властно, бросишь оковы. Давай электричество, дай рок-н-ролла. Не бойся добраться.
Я на днях такой артефакт нашел. За сколько бы его загнать?
Свое отражение.
Однозначно таких я еще не встречал.
Потеряна пота, по памяти бредить и чудесами, сменяя реальность. В объятиях держишь не тех всех, не с теми. День сопроводит могилу, что близко. Или крематорий, или без вести сгинул. Оставив ремарку в жизни другой. Возьмешь с полки книгу, ее подменили, и та же картина. Забей! Им верить нету смысла!
Голову бы сейчас горячую. Они эту херню консервируют.
гитара, старая подруга, и с нею лёж металл, и тонет днём мирская жизнь, как сука. В истории панк-рока твой след тяжелый опознан перегруза, и рок звезда и точка, лети скорее к звездам. Сожги, кто тянет тебе руки, от скуки затмевая солнце, и у него есть то же имя, как и у тех в далеком прошлом. И единицы лишь поймут, что значит пустота внутри. Я как калибри, а вокруг открытый
скукотища.
космос. Глотать их не имеет
Вот
смысла.
сейчас бы найти гору
Бегом
артефактов,
куту
да укатить из этой
изобрести,
сраной
продев
зоны.
небесной нитью. И никто не сможет и не смог, отматывая раз за разом, как реальный срок. И в одиночной камере на воле, и было некуда идти, кончался уже воздух. И не сдавался, просто был. В лиричной музыке без слов.
Бабу
Смотрел,
бы.
как небо почернело.
Бабы, конечно,
И
грызут,
этой ночью
но
увидел.
не так, как эти мутанты. Жрать хочу. Ну как же консервы надоели. А батоны с колбасой хреновые нынче стали делать.
Прочел недавно «Пикник на обочине». Пророческая, конечно, книга вышла. Кто бы мог подумать, что подобное произойдет в реальности.
Не дрейфьте, все в бой! Собрались на...
Going to prove to our own satisfaction that things that are wrong will not be righted merely by perpetuating them. Well, the thoughtful person sits down like Omar the tent maker and begins to contemplate these matters and get a liberal education very quickly. Because when one country invades another, when the Iranians attack the Iraqis, the same thing is happening inside ourselves on a smaller scale. We are opposing, attacking, incapacitating elements of our own temperaments in an effort to attain some kind of an unreasonable sovereignty of a part over the whole. Actually, all nature is asking of man is that he will use his compound temperament, disposition, and integration to advance the common good of himself and others of his kind. The parts of man must work together, or there is some kind of a war in the body. The nations of society must work together, for tyranny will ultimately destroy society. So we have the human body as a miniature for all the processes that are going on around us in society. That we can learn from this is obvious. The only thing we need to do is think about it. In other words, we can begin to use the mind to solve its own mistakes. And this is more or less a sheer genius. But it was something we were intended to do. It is not unreasonable, it is not a fantastic impossible that we can never hope to accomplish. Many serious, thoughtful people can accomplish it if they want to. And as a few do improve, the majority will follow to some degree. So as we sit around and watch all these things that are happening, some people will turn on the newsreels, news on the television, listen and say, oh, it's all terrible. Others will turn it off because they don't want to hear it. A third group does not believe a word of it. And still another group is fighting to some political purpose which it has assumed to be significant. All of these things are a great expenditure of energy and nothing to help the mind. Most people in thinking feed the mind on junk foods, and as a result of that it brings out some very junky decisions which are not necessary, inevitable, or useful. If, however, we really want to start a little thinking, there's plenty of it here to do, plenty of chance to do it. But decisions have to be made. There are penalties or prices upon everything in nature. The penalty for a misdeed is misery. The price of a good deed is intelligence. The individual must use the faculties that he has the way they were intended to be used if he expects to benefit. There is no one who is any better off by being under the tyranny of his own intellect, or of a collective group of intellects. A whole group of people coming to wrong decisions does not result in a correct decision. In this case, the majority is not always right. The majority is not right now because the majority doesn't think at all, or is so selfish and self-centered that it doesn't care. So we start in by deciding that the mind is a potential state, the energy of which are being recklessly wasted. How do we try to do this? Well, There are two ways. We must always our educational system. We must begin to train the mind to think, and not to inherit the notions of other people. We have to train the mind to contribute to the future rather than build all of its wealth and strength upon the past. The past is important, but only to the degree it gives us true insights into the repetition of ancient policies. So we have to start in either by going to school in a different type of educational theory, more like that of Comenius, who gave us the public school in the beginning, but unfortunately died too soon, about 300 years too soon, to be able to control the system after it passed out of his keeping. Comenius was very simple in his ideas. He says it's very easy to overeducate people. When you overeducate a person above and beyond his capacities, you have a misfortune and a desperately unhappy person. So education should be appropriate to the needs. And education should begin always in moral instruction. It should begin by a proper use of emotion as a curb upon thought. If the emotions of charity, love, piety, faith, and all of the kindlier feelings, if these emotions are cultivated constructively, they can definitely influence the mind. The mind can be changed by the use of other faculties which man possesses. Also, the mind can be altered considerably by the physical body, because after a while the mistakes of the mind show up there in terms that cannot be contradicted. So the mind has to gradually realize that it is not the lord of all it surveys, that it cannot do anything that it wants to do and not be punished. The mind must come to the realization that it exists primarily to learn what is right and do it. Now, this does not mean that life is going to become a dull monotony, or that for lack of mistakes we have nothing to live for. It is because of the fact that the values, joys, securities, and wonderful internal experiences of being right are more lasting and more satisfying than the result of any vice that can be cultivated. So we can hope that people will quietly sit down and begin looking around them and looking within them. Looking around to see what's the matter with the families around them, what's the matter with the business that is falling apart, why they can't speak to their relatives anymore, why their children are delinquent. All these things they can notice. And they can also do what a number of groups are doing now, organizing themselves against these delinquencies. It is becoming more and more obvious that bad habits are endangering the survival of civilization. Well, bad habits are simply basically bad mental attitudes, wrong thinking, wrong decisions about what is good and what is bad. Now, a lot of people say that we already have this information. We do. There are very few people in this world who do not know right from wrong. But they do have other pressures that are stronger. Instead of being concerned with right and wrong, they are concerned with what they want, what they wish to do. If it's revenge, they want to have it. If it's some kind of argument, they want to enjoy it. And they feel perfectly right and free to elect the wrong persons to public office. These things are not part of the discipline that we need, but they are coming out all around us. What we need is more and more thoughtfulness, the education of the mind in realities. The education of the mind that when it says, I think I will go out and buy some cocaine, immediately the mind itself says, no, you don't, because you can see, know, hear, read, and observe the consequences of such a conduct. There is no law that says that you have to be a narcotics addict. The only reason is that because it gives you a temporary feeling of omniscience. You suddenly feel you are bigger than anybody else, but you suddenly realize that you are smaller than most people by the time it's over. There is no advancement, but we do it. So the mind says, well, let's go out and buy this material, or go into bankruptcy trying to pay for it. Now, all this is not the result of a bad mind. It is the result of a bad use of a potentially good mind. Or perhaps it is calling upon more strength of character than we possess. But if we haven't got the strength of character, the mind will bill it for us if we are willing to accept. So the mind can pick out every fault that there is in society today, and finally add to it the consequence of the fact that we personally are committing these faults, and it's all being shown to us clearly through arteriosclerosis and other symptoms of bodily distress. We are actually a single creature. Our thoughts, our emotions, and our bodies are part of one entity. And when we shortchange any of the parts, the whole suffers. The same with a nation. A nation that is well governed must consider all the needs of all the people. It must defend itself against the extravagances of some individuals who wish to break faith with the integrity of life, we as a person. When we are ready to break faith with integrity, we are on our way to all kinds of difficulties. Now, most people are not such marvelous, terribly important people that they can necessarily worry too much about some of these problems. What they really need to do is to get down to the small things of life and try to work them out. In our own little way, we have headaches, dyspepsia, indigestion. Anacin and its byproducts, largest selling drug in the United States, because it is a treatment for headaches. Now, headaches are sometimes legitimate, but more often misconduct is the basis of headaches. The individual with the headache is the one who is worried when he should have thought. An individual who ate what he should not have eaten. An individual who got into an argument that he should not have gotten into. Or have all kinds of negative, destructive fears, anxieties, worries, and antagonisms until he gets so miserable that he has to take some more aspirin. Now, aspirin is not a cure for anything. It reduces symptoms for a little bit. But the only cure for the difficulties that aspirin is taken for is clear thinking. The individual, by thinking himself through this maze of his own misconducts, can find a way to remove most of his headaches. Those that remain may represent need of medical or psychological attention. The individual may have to go down as far as his diet in order to find the roots of some of his headaches. But most of his headaches come from above, because the headache, as is implied, is in the head. And it's in the head where the headache arises in the mind. Now, the brain is not responsible. That poor little hunk of flesh is just doing the best it can. It has been given over to the custody of a heartless taskmaster. It is a slave to the will of the mind behind it. It has nothing to do or nothing to say but to transmit the impulses, good or bad, to some other part of the body that is being affected or they hope will be affected. So there is no way out of this unless the individual realizes that the mind has as its primary purpose not ingenuity but integrity. We think the mind is a great thing these days when it invents a computer. That really is the answer. Already people don't know what to do with them. The problem of computers is already assuming gigantic proportions. Another individual might point out that we are indebted to the mind for putting a man on the moon. Yeah, it's probably true. The mind was having a grand time on its own, with no consideration for the rest of the body which belongs to it. Landing the man on the moon was a scientific achievement, but the real problems of life were not touched by it. They then decided they'd land one on Mars. They can go on until they land one in the Milky Way, but it still will not prevent the common mistakes we make here every day. This is the difference of perspective. It is the fact the individual wants anything that takes the mind away from his own need to grow. He wants to be amused. If he has wealth, he spends it recklessly. If he has poverty, he gets what he can by any means possible. But with all of that, the mind, instead of being the leader of a marvelous organization of faculties, is simply catering. And actually, strange it may seem, the mind isn't particularly pleased over all this. The mind isn't happy and jolly as the result of all kinds of bad decisions that it inspires. It is worried to death. The mind is just as unhappy as the person who has it in his head at that time. The mind is not a self-solving problem. It is one that is adding constantly to the creating of them. And the only thing that the mind can do is to suggest partial remedies for mighty mistakes. And the remedies, yet generally, are simply a rearrangement of the elements of the mistakes so that we are still in the same trouble we were in before. So to get the mind out of this squirrel cage in which it functions, we have to go to work on it. So, first of all, we relax. Now, relax doesn't mean do nothing, but relax means that we stop breeding or feeding wrong information into the mind. We stop telling the mind that we want to be rich if it calls for a murder. We got to tell the mind that we want what we want when we want it, and that this is wrong. Little by little, by reducing the temptations which we impose upon the mind, we can prevent a great many of the mistakes that arise from poor mentation. If we are willing to cut down the false appetites, then there will be less bad luck, so-called, hovering around us all the time. Out of a quiet mind, we can then say to the mind, think. And think with the aid of all the instruments that have been given to the mind to help it to think. And the individual whose mind is being considered must help the mind to do this. It must do it by presenting the mind a picture of the world thought. It must remind the mind of the tragedies of selfishness, as represented all over the earth all the time. It must teach the mind the miseries of competition. It must also lose, or help the mind to lose, the idea that the more it has, the happier it'll be. When in reality, as Buddha pointed out, the more we have, the more sleep we lose trying to take care of it. All kinds of things, by a very gentle thought, can be caused to relax. And when we look back on a feud in the family, we can very quietly say to ourselves, let's review this feud. First of all, what good did it accomplish? And someone will say, well, it accomplished some good. I got a great deal of joy out of hating my neighbors. And I'm very happy to say I haven't spoken to my aunt for 25 years. Now, this is an achievement. And of course, it has devastated the aunt, who probably doesn't care and doesn't even know about it. Now, this is if you start analyzing these things and breaking them down, you gradually come to realize that all of the negative, unhealthy attitudes that we have are bad bargains at best. So we didn't talk to the aunt for 25 years. In our heart there was a wrangle, there was a hatred, there was a disturbance. And in the body that means there's an acidosis. You cannot hate somebody without the body suffering, regardless of how you do it. You cannot ignore a virtue without giving ground to a vice. But most of all, you cannot continue to build a temperament around mistaken attitudes without ultimately shortening life, increasing sickness, and alienating yourself from the better things that make life valuable. Getting away from all these false decisions and conclusions may have a tendency to cause the individual to drift a little toward religion. He may feel that his mind needs a little spiritual indoctrination. Well, that's very good as far as it goes, but there's a point here we must remember, that nearly all religions are mind-produced. They are the result of thinking. They are a result of various pages in history, various races and nations, coming to their own conclusion concerning the nature of God and what God wants. So if we are going to turn to religion for consolation, then it is very important to understand the nature of the religion that we are going to believe. And of course for Christians, the Sermon on the Mount is a very good foundation. But most Christians aren't able to live by it. Why? Because the mind objects to it. Now this objection is very similar to the objection we have today, where science, for the most part, glorifies atheism, and politics can hardly wait to get rid of all theological systems. This means that that part of society which is wrong wants to take over. The reason it wants to take over is that religion is a moralism that can interfere with ambitions. It can interfere with the determination to be rich. It can interfere with the absolute competition that dominates our thinking today. The fact is that when the wrong people want a thing, that's the thing the right people don't want. The individual who needs religious consolation to protect himself from materialism has to develop his own sense of values. But once he gets a strong enough sense of values, he is not likely to give in to the hypnosis of prevailing customs and fashions. The only thing that materialism can dangle over his head as a promise is that when he's dead, he won't remember his mistakes. This is not exactly worthwhile living for, however. It's necessary to remember our mistakes even for the length of a lifetime over here. We only need to remember them long enough to correct them, and things start moving much better. So we go along and we find the mind sitting in all corners of this problem of living. It is present everywhere, trying to influence and dominate the lives of human beings. Yet we need it. But we need a mind that has been dedicated to a purpose. We need a mind that has accepted the responsibility of leadership over the problems of material existence. All these problems originate somewhere within the mind, and they have to be corrected by a mental dedication. We have enough evidence at this moment to convince any court of law that it is impossible to break the rules of nature and be happy. Yet we don't see nature anymore. Where we used to see nature with its roads of trees and its little dirt roads and its waterfalls, we see nothing now but condominiums, vast projects, vast metropolitan centers, great industrial complexes, and nuclear energy centers. These things are what we see. The sky and the earth and the sun and the moon are now put in small parks where we have to go to have a picnic once in a while and to see them. We have gradually weaned ourselves away from the true world, the world of realities, and have taken on instead a fantastic jungle which we have created. Now the fact that we have created it does not make it good. And the fact that we have created it will not make it last. The mistakes that we make through ignorance, we must correct through intelligence. The mind, at the very beginning, became more and more immersed in such problems as survival. It tried to build a philosophy around the small things of life that the primitive human being was able to contemplate. But little by little, it has created what we call civilization, which is a compound of uncivilized peoples. It is not something that we can be proud of. And it will never get better unless we do something about it. Now, of course, long spans of history probably don't intrigue the average person too much. He's not going to die of a broken heart about something that might happen 10,000 years from now, or that a generation or a civilization will destroy itself sometime in the future. These are not the things that really lead the individual to change his ways. Even where he knows that he is passing these mistakes on to his immediate children, who may have to face the catastrophe, even this contemplation is not real enough to make any major change. Now, he thinks that a major change is getting up in front of the government and making them do something. But the major change for the average individual is simply his own attitude toward life. If he gets a straight view of life, he is becoming a free citizen of the universe. And the parent who can't change the political system can at the same time communicate to children the real facts of how to survive even in a catastrophe. Somewhere there has to be a hard core of reality, or every major difficulty becomes a terminal mystery, which is not reasonable or right. So we can go on, and we can go on to try and see what would happen if very quietly we begin to think it through. When we say, Joe's got a better job than I have, think it through and see whether it is as important as to make you jealous. Because if you're jealous long enough, the reward is likely to be ulcers. The man who has the job will never know you didn't like it. If you tell him so outside with very great firmness and make an enemy out of him, he will probably decide he doesn't need your friendship that much anyway. But that isn't where it ends. The hard words you use continue in you. And first thing you know, these hard words become a gastrointestinal difficulty. The final immediate payment is not karma in a future life. The immediate payment is misery here and now. And this is what most people will try to minimize as much as possible. We'll always make enough mistakes to keep ourselves busy. We won't be allowed to just sit back, as the old folk used to say, and float to paradise on flowery beds of ease. That isn't likely. But we can gradually recognize the practical side, the scientific side of our attitudes. We can realize that the effect does follow the cause, just as the wheel of the cart follows the foot of the ox. We can realize that the stomachache we have today could have been caused by a dozen mistakes we might have made yesterday or the day before, including gluttony, alcoholism, a hasty meal, a poor selection of dietetic materials, or just plain eating when in a case of complete nervousness or anxiety. So we have to recognize that no matter what we do that is wrong, something's going to hurt or itch somewhere. And this itch is itself a valid statement of facts. We can do what we want to about most everything except the physical body. We can change almost anything except this physical structure in which we live, and which is important to our existence in this world. We cannot fool it. We cannot deceive it, and we cannot cure it if we have sickened it beyond a certain degree. There are minor maladies that we can help, but if the cause has not been removed, they will be back. And wherever we find an individual whose mental integrities are not firm, he is a good candidate for some form of physical difficulty. Now, it doesn't follow that we can be completely happy or live forever just because we keep the rules of life. But in keeping the rules of life, it's not just the food rules that we are concerned with. The rules of life that we see shadowed in the body relationships are in all of the relationships. There is no way in which we can be unkind and gain anything but trouble. And the beautiful sense of success that we get when we have insulted another person will last for a minute, but the body chemistry will be injured maybe for months. Everything that is not pleasant, not constructive, not cooperative, and does not seek the good, everything that lacks these motives is subject to a suffering equivalent to the attitude that they have. Some of the suffering is physical, some will be emotional, some will be mental. But where the individual has had a wrong attitude, he's going to pay for it. Now, this is but it doesn't really mean it that way at all. Because the equipment that we have enables us to do it right. And all of nature, the universe, and the divine powers are concerned with us doing it right. What is wanted more than anything else is the human being who is able to become a permanent factor for good in the evolution of humanity. The development of humanity is a project carried on by powers much greater than ourselves. A great wave of life is moving through space, and we are part of it. And along the edge of this wave of space are stragglers of all kinds, and there are also every type of, we'll say, vicious person, every type of troublemaker, every type of gangster somewhere in this motley group. This mass of motley group is slowing down the normal growth of human society. The more misfits we have, the more cantankerous emotional intoxicants we have, the longer this problem continues. The lesson to be learned from a small attack in the liver is applicable to the 4.5 or 5 billion human beings that populate this planet. All of them have minds. And for the most part, these minds are not doing much good for them. Instead of these minds leading them to peace and integrity, the minds are leading them to further trouble. This funny's problem is how to get away with it. What do we do? In addition to these various rules and laws, what is it that can outwit the mind? We can say maybe the spirit could, but then we don't hear many remarks coming from that level. Where and what is it that we can do to outwit the mind? Well, that which can outwit the mind, if we give it proper thought and time, that is the emotions. The emotions are far older than the mind. We had emotions long before we were able to think very much. But the emotions are a different type of thing. If the emotions are hate, they will then enlist the aid of the mind to make that hate the most important thing in the world. This is what happens with wars. Wars are emotions stirred up to become mental hatreds. If, however, on another angle of the matter, the heart and the emotions are in some way enriched, ennobled, or made more significant to us, the result will be a great deal more peace and charity and insight. So we can say above selfishness there can occasionally rise a great heroism. And a great heroism is an individual rising above his own security to protect something greater than himself. And this is, in almost every case, love or compassion. The individual, therefore, who is able to strengthen his emotional realizations of life, who is able to love honestly, is in a position to gain a great many benefits almost immediately. The difficulty, however, is that love plus intellect can be loaded with ulterior motives. Instead of the love being pure and true and right, the individual loves for gain, loves in some way because he hopes something better back from his affection. It's like the religionist who believes that he is building a church for the benefit of humanity, but he is also building a fame for himself. This type of thing is to be constantly watched. The mind, in the presence of an honorable and sincere affection, seldom raises much objection. But where the objections are raised is where the mind itself is still largely embedded in ulterior motives which the individual has not corrected or matured out of in his own temperament. So when we are working for some of these causes, we turn to religion for help. We turn to religion because we believe sincerely that this can give us a new value with which to transmute the mind. Very few religions have ever been successful as mental institutions. They have always appealed to the graces of the spirit. They have appealed to the love of humanity and to the love of deity and to the recognition of the universal benevolence which governs all things, and possibly most of all, the realization that our mistakes are due to our falling away from the practice of our religious convictions. So we can say love can do a great deal if it is sincere. Love can take a bad situation and correct it. But the correction must be honest. An individual with a stomachache and had an argument with his daughter cannot reconcile on the grounds that it will cure the stomachache. This gets back into the old problem of barter and exchange, and that's not where we are concerned. Unless the motives involved in these things are above every ulterior motive, there is very little to them. But if a person's affections are so sincere that without ulterior motive they make a great sacrifice for another, or even a small sacrifice, but do this honestly, expecting nothing in return, only under those conditions does this action have a definite therapeutic advantage. The more peaceful we become, the more gentle we are, the more we love those who are close to us, and in a large way those who need everywhere in the world, the more we get over the advantages to self and realize that we live in a world that must live and die together. If we must come to realize in the end that there can be no final good for us as persons unless we have helped to build a common good among all persons. And this is done by religion, and it could be aided by education. But only if education and all these other factors are considerably renovated. The mind must recover from the delusion of ulterior motive. There must not be that tricky little thought hiding somewhere, that what we are really doing is looking for something for ourselves, even though we appear to be serving others. We must get over all ulterior motive, for the mind building on ulterior motive continues to become a schema, continues to perpetuate those very attitudes which are least likely to contribute to the public good. Now, we have more contact with other people than we realize. There are very few people who live for themselves alone. We are not just individuals in a sea of faces. We are all people. We are all involved in the same problems, and every life meets and mingles with other persons during all the years of physical existence. It is therefore very important that each person learn to understand how to mingle with people, how to work with people, and not become involved in their prejudices and their opinions and their attitudes on a variety of subjects. We have to realize that a person with a religion different from our own can be perfectly sincere, and there is no reason for us to judge that person adversely unless his conduct is open to dispute. The fact that there is no such a thing as Christian honesty or Christian dishonesty should be thought about, because all honesty is honesty. Every religion teaches it. Every human being who is honorable teaches it and lives it. And when this becomes a clean living pattern, we will have very much less crime or confusion in the world, practically none. But as long as we claim all these things as intellectual facts, but never apply them to conduct, or at least very seldom, only in a great emergency, as long as we do not live them, the mental attitude weakens, and the mind finally becomes converted to our own selfishness, and will perpetuate it and continue it on and on through all the years of our lives. We don't want to make a mental delinquent out of our own minds, and we do it every day when we conspire and we cheat and we chisel for the various advantages we are seeking desperately to maintain. We also constantly carry this forward when we try to influence other people to change their ways, primarily for our convenience. All these things are not helpful. The mind is gradually being spoiled, and a spoiled mind is a very unpleasant thing. A spoiled mind is irritable, unreasonable, vindictive, belligerent, and almost any unpleasant synonym you can think of, simply because it has been mistrained. And in society today we are sending forth into the world generations of young people in whom vices are becoming innate. These young people have not been taught the values of life. They have been taught only how to get ahead at the cost of anything and everyone. They have not been taught any moral lesson about what happens to things. They haven't had enough education in them to restrain from narcotics addiction. Yet they read in the paper, they see in the motion pictures, they observe everywhere the results of narcotic addiction. Yet they keep right on doing it. Why? Because in their mind, they are excusing or vindicating themselves in one of several ways. One way is that they don't care the cost, that's the way they feel right now. This is the important thing. Well, the same is true in national integrations. In wars, lots of people don't believe in much of anything except what they want right now, and that usually is to survive. The narcotics addict also sometimes does this because he is against society. He wishes to prove definitely that he is no part of a society he does not respect. This can lead to all kinds of crimes which arise as a result of the terrorism of non-adjustment, incapable of straight thinking. Then the narcotic problem, again, is highly profitable. Billions of dollars a year are taken from legitimate enterprise to take care of narcotics addiction. Now these people know this. There's no person probably as high and lower than the third or fourth grade who hasn't been some way contacted. The school yards are now practically centers for the distribution of narcotics. Why? How is it that young people with minds that are supposed to be growing up to become useful citizens being snared in a thing like this? Well, the reason it is that the mind tolerates it. The mind gets all kinds of attitude development which make it accepted. The mind thinks it's wonderful to be clever, to be different, to take chances, and most of all, to lose all sense of responsibility. Don't worry, do what you want to now. All this type of attitude ends in a tragedy, and in this case the body itself goes with the rest. And most of these younger people will ultimately either find a remedy or else will kill themselves. So why does the mind do this to us? Why doesn't the mind see the Sermon on the Mount? Why doesn't the mind accept the Ten Commandments? Well, the reason why, largely, is the ulterior motive that is in ourselves. There is no evil spirit somewhere teaching us to be evil. The thing is that down in our hearts and hearts A great many people simply want what they want. And the way of getting it is immaterial. The way is to have it. They feel certain that if they get what they want, they will have leisure, happiness, peace, tranquility, success, superiority, distinction, and power.
Мутанты говорят,
And
опять
what they
кого-то
really
ночью
get is the
тащили.
same 6 square feet that they always got. Back to the earth from which they came. There is no way of winning that kind of a fight. But why fight? The emotions don't say so usually, unless they're badly corrupted. The body is screaming, don't do it. But the mind has found out how to argue these things until the individual surrenders. The mind finally permits him to do what he secretly wanted to do for the secret reasons that he wanted to do it. Almost every one of these young people has some kind of a discouragement against the facts of life that is leading them to this type of attitude. And yet we are doing nothing to correct the unhappy facts of life that are driving people to crime, narcotics, and alcoholism. They are people who cannot adjust to the corruptions of the time unless they first demoralize themselves. So this goes on continuously and has been for a long time. The mind has to be taken over, and when an individual makes a commitment to religion or to anything that he feels is necessary to his well-being, he's got to make a complete conviction of it. He's got to go to work on his own mind. He's got to use that side of his mind, which is his true mind, the divine mind in himself, and get away from this animal mind that is constantly contributing to his delinquency. The first thing the individual must do in censoring a thought is to decide whether that thought is right or wrong basically. If it is wrong, reject it. If it is right, fight for it, even though it may take a great deal of energy, time, and sacrifice. But the fact remains, and has always been, as far as our civilization is concerned, the two minds are fighting each other. One mind is a mind of gratification. The other is a mind of edification. One says, do what you please, the other says, do what you should. And the world is divided now between these two approaches to the problems of existence. Unless we solve this as individuals, we will not be able to continue the way of life we want to become accustomed to. If we do not do something about these things, we will be mentally, emotionally, or physically sick. And while many are not in a condition in which they are being treated for their problems, it's safe to say that a large percentage of the world's population at the present time is neurotic. Far more than those that are under treatment. So the mind, the highest aspect of our mind, what the Hindu calls the Arupa Manas, the divine mind, the mind of truth in ourselves, is forever fighting the mind of gratification. It is the struggle between spirit and body. It is between soul and the soulless. It is between the invisible cause and the visible compromised effect. So each of us have this little fight on our hands. In many cases, it's not a very serious one. There are not great big things that we're doing wrong. But there should be a few, at least moderate-sized things that we're doing right. And doing right completely, because we believe in them, because we know they're right, and because we know that we must face the consequences if we don't. Philosophy, however, is not based upon a perpetuation of punishment. It is actually a system of cultivation by which the individual recovers from the need of punishment by gradually overcoming his own mistakes. By doing it this way, the mind becomes the most powerful instrument for good that is imaginable. And until that time, it's going to be hovering around, trying to convince us that we should compromise principles in order to have a little more fun now and dyspepsia later. This type of thinking has got to come more and more
Эх,
clearly
парни,
into our
хорошо
consciousness.
живем все-таки.
Well, folks, I think that's all for the morning.
уходящее вернуть, как необъятное опять. Как сложно встал продолжить путь, вникая в суть, вернувшись в себя, что будет путь, не забывать. И как желанием вопреки,
Чё-то я устал, мужики.
жизнь как течение реки, потоком вдаль несет года, и как не жаль, но навсегда то ли печаль, то ли беда. Как лихорадка или зуд болезненно грызут воспоминания. Не расставания, не
Я на днях такой артефакт нашел. За сколько бы его загнать? Однозначно таких я еще не встречал.
только во сне плачу, чтоб душа
Вот сейчас бы найти гору артефактов, да укатить из этой сраной зоны.
пошли удачу. Боже, пошли удачу. Воспоминаниям шаг за грань, воспоминания в чертог. И сам с собой, идя на брань, отдавши дань, отпустит Бог. Ты только встань и за порог. Там, разорвав тупую нить, простить и отпустить воспоминания.
Я на днях такой артефакт нашел. За сколько бы его загнать? Однозначно таких я еще не встречал.
Разделяют только во сне. Плачу, чтоб душа лучик света не погас. Боже, пошли удачу. Боже, пошли удачу.
Мутанты, говорят, опять кого-то ночью тащили. Лову бы сейчас горячего. Они эту херню консервируют. Блин, я так жрать хочу, что у меня желудок к позвоночнику лепит.
Многие сторожилы помнят талантливого инженера Макса по кличке Миксер. Он еще рассказывал в уникальном костюме собственного производства. Куда он вообще делся? Следующая песня для Макса вдруг откликнется.
Чё-то я это... простыл, что ли? Вот сейчас бы найти гору артефактов, да укатить из этой сраной зоны. Сейчас бы кино какое глянуть. Интересно, что в киношках сейчас крутят? Бабу бы. Бабы, конечно, грызут, но не так, как эти мутанты. Плову бы сейчас горячего. Они эту херню консервируют.
Гневных комментариев, чтобы
Покемарить,
про
что
них
ли?
перестали шутить, сами знаете, какие
Или
шутки.
попозже.
Ну так, парни, вы сами себя со стороны слышали вообще? Следующая песня для вас.
Твою ж налево. Это что у меня на комбезе дырка? Чёртовы тушканы.
Скатилась по щеке слеза, осталась
I'm gonna go for one more resource run, take about an hour, and then I'll call it quits for dinner. Maybe do a little more looting up off stream, and then hopefully do quests next time. A little questing. I'm gonna play something else that I don't know if it's gonna be bullshit or not, but I haven't listened to it. Should be interesting.
Alright, man, welcome to Pro 777 Radio. This is episode 483. Jason Lindgren is with me, and George Wiseman returns. In a minute here, I'll look up the episodes that George has been on with us. As you may remember, George has a Brown's gas machine. Now, I want to say a couple things before I get the guys in. First of all, this technology is not for you if you are lazy or if you're not going to be responsible. In my view, this technology is for responsible adults. If you don't clean your machine, if you don't set your machine up properly, not good. Not good at all. On the other side, I would like to say this. For those who have followed a long time, you remember that my mother passed away near Easter of 22 of dementia and Parkinson's, as the mainstream calls it. This is where I saw the machine do some amazing things. The first thing that happened, to refresh everyone's memory, is that my mother one day when we had first set up the machine was not present. She was in outer space somewhere. The dementia had creeped on that day heavy. I put the breathing apparatus on her from George Wiseman's Brown's gas device, and within 15 minutes she was present. Now, I want to say a thing because so many people are getting dementia, and here's the issues that I had. While the machine would bring her back to present as the disease progressed, when she was in her right mind, she got to the point where she recognized how miserable she was. In other words, had I not put her on the machine, she would have been thinking she was in childhood or riding a train or whatever the dementia had put in her mind. If I brought her back to reality, over about 2 hours, she would become miserable because she was aware of the condition that she was in. But here's the real thing. She got a melanoma on top of her head. I sent George images of this, and we had talked, and this is just flat out amazing. I took the hydrogenated water, if that's the right thing to call it, the water that you can drink, read the directions, that's had the Brown's gas going through it, so I'll just call it hydrogenated, but that's probably not quite right. And I soaked the sterile gauze. The part on the top of her head where the melanoma was bigger than a quarter, not quite the size of a 50-cent piece. I put the soaked hydrogenated water sterile gauze on it, and then I put a shower cap to capture the gas that you would normally breathe under it. I did it twice, or 2 or 3 times a day for about 10 days. The whole scabby, looking, nasty, cancerous thing started to peel off, and it eventually peeled off. I had the nurse that came in with me, and I lifted it off, and the nurse was blown away. There was no more black, there was fresh pink skin, the melanoma never came back. When it dried, for a while longer we did that. And so what I'm telling you here was she had a melanoma that the doctors wanted to cut off her scalp at almost 90. You know how the story's going to be. You know that there's all this. And what happened blew my mind. Additionally, Rose has had endless emails about people who smoke or have COPD or have breathing issues that are saying this changed everything for them. Now, I'm not trying to tell you this is the miracle cure for everything, but what I'm telling you is we get reports, and what I just told you, melanoma, of all things, was dealt with. Just to finish off here before I get the guys in, George was on episodes 382 and 365. You can check out those back episodes. If you go to the website, at the top navigation, there's a sponsored link. I've moved all the things that we support or sponsor as useful products. George Wiseman's image is in there as a sponsored link. It's the second row from the bottom. It has his face on the image. It's called Brown's Gas Machine, is under the caption. If you choose to get one of these devices, that sponsored link, I think it saves you something like $500. All right, there's my big mouthful. Welcome, Jason.
Oh, and a chilly good morning.
All right, do you want to have anything down? I mean, we've seen so many emails. And the other thing I guess we should mention, Jason, is people who are relatively healthy seem to notice very little difference when they use the Brown's Gas device. People who are not so healthy seem to be the ones that we hear from that said, wow.
Well, I use it every day. Predominantly, I drink the water, and I like the way it makes me feel. And I definitely notice if I'm not drinking enough of it, I just feel like something's missing.
The first time that I drank the water, it felt like my body wanted it. As it stands now, here I am, the responsible adult. Since everything has happened here, Mom's passed away, I've had to deal with the house and everything. I now need to go clean the machine, as is directed in instructions, and reset it up again. Anyhow, welcome, George. Sorry for the big soliloquy.
It was perfect. That was amazing. And to address the healthy thing, it's really important that people that feel healthy do the supplementation because it maintains health. And my goodness, my God, that is the ideal. You don't want to have to bring yourself back from an ailment. You want to not be sick in the first place. So that, and that's what they're discovering when they do the rodent studies. For example, the smallest or the least gain was mice had a 30% healthful life extension when they were inhaling 2% gas mixture for their life from when they were young. And another mouse one was 50%, and there was a rat study that was done that the rats just didn't die. They stayed healthy until they had to, the experiment ended. I don't remember how much over it was. I need to look that study up. But they actually euthanized the rats because they weren't dying. So isn't it good? Like I expect at this particular point to be able to play with my great grandkids. I'm playing with my grandkids and I enjoy it greatly, but I expect to play with my great grandkids. So it is important. And you're right, when you're feeling healthy, when you are healthy, there isn't too much of a change. Like you notice from when you have ailments and then you have to fix them. But the idea is to maintain health. And even people who think themselves healthy, like I did, like when I started inhaling Brown's gas, I didn't start because I thought it was going to make me healthier. I did it because I wanted to prove that it was safe. Because people kept asking me if they could inhale the gas. And because I knew it to be an explosive gas, I was saying no. Well, it turns out I was wrong. First of all, you can inhale a non-explosive mixture if you keep the amount of hydrogen in your intake breath less than 4%. So we set up everything to do that. And I was inhaling 2% mixture, which is most of the scientific, there's thousands now of scientific studies are set at 2%. So that's what I did. And I was getting these health gains that totally astonished me. And even after inhaling for several years now, I've been inhaling since March of 2016. Last year, I discovered that I had regained my balance. And what I was doing is I was washing my toes while I was in the shower. I just lifted up my foot and I was washing my toes without leaning against the shower wall, which for at least a decade, I'd have to lean against the shower wall when I was in my 50s to wash my toes for balance, because I couldn't balance. But now I not only have the strength, but the balance to be able to lift, and flexibility to lift my foot up and wash my toes, which I found to be quite amazing when I suddenly realized that's what I was doing. And so you can be healthier without even knowing it, without even really realizing it. So anyway, that's my little spiel on health.
All right, well, there's a couple things I want to mention here. One thing that I noticed within a couple days when I first got it is it seems to pick your libido back up in more of like a physical stamina way, if you feel like you have a bit more oomph. But it does certainly affect your libido, at least it did mine. But here's a thing that I think we should mention too. So my wife was having problems with her teeth and not feeling well, but we didn't know that it was her teeth. And the first time that I put her on the machine, the next morning she had an abscess. And so we said, wow, there's something wrong with the teeth. Went in, and then the dentist is all oh yeah, there's these problems. And it feels to me like what happened was it made the abscess express much more quickly. And the other thing I think is important is, so we laid off while that was immediately fixed, because she woke up and it expressed she didn't feel so hot. But the point is, I wonder how many weeks and months might have went on, and I'm just guessing, if it did in fact force it to express before we would have even been aware of it.
Yes. My response to that first with the libido, I think it's one of the two things that caused me to still be alive today. I am not joking. When I died, after that I started inhaling the Brown's gas, I was in really bad shape. I seriously did not care if I lived or died, which was one of the reasons why I was willing to inhale what I thought was potentially an explosive gas. And I videotaped myself while I was doing it with the idea that there'd be a video of posterity if I happened to come to an unfortunate end. So and that video is on my YouTube channel, and people can compare that video to my earlier pictures, which are also on my YouTube channel, and you can see the difference. I seem to have regressed biologically at least 15, sometimes 20 years, depending on what pictures you look at. So, two things. First of all, a doctor in Germany is now prescribing Brown's gas for depression, which I'm telling you, when you're in use, there is no depression worse than that, in my opinion. And secondly, so I'm sure that the Brown's gas was helping me with depression, and I didn't even know it at the time. But the second thing I really did notice was it did take me a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks, but I noticed that my libido was, for me, it turned out to be almost like a teenager. I seriously wanted to have sex. And my body was just ready and willing. And I'm telling you that it's almost impossible not to care if you live or die when your body is like that.
At what age, George? What age are we talking about here? Typically, I think libido for most men in this country starts falling off somewhere in the 40s, maybe.
Yeah, and that's about what happened to me. I'm just trying to figure. It was in 2016. I'm 65 now. This is so like 6 or 7 years ago. I was in my late 50s. Yep.
So I think I might append what my experience was. Clearly, there's a revival of libido. It's almost like a bigger, I guess I would say, and maybe a mental sharpness that accompanies it, something like that. I don't really know how to say that. It's a feeling of well-being, but there's some energy there.
Yes, I would agree with all of that. And my equipment wasn't, up to par really either. It was hard to get erect, and I hadn't had sex for probably 10 years before that. And so everything started to work correctly. And there's actually a reason for it, having to do with something called EZ gel. Are you familiar with Gerald Pollack's work and his what's called they call easy water?
I'm not sure.
Okay, this is really important and dramatic, and it's Brown's gas that does it, not just the hydrogen. Hydrogen is good, it's a building block of life, but the Brown's gas contains another gas we call electrically expanded water. It's water that's in a plasma form. It's water that has soaked up electrons until it's become a gaseous form that is not water vapor or steam. It's actually water, H2O, that is electrically charged to a point where it's become a plasma. Okay, that said, when we put, I just did some experiments with the University of Washington, Gerald Pollack's work, and one of his graduate students, we put oxygen, we put hydrogen, and we put Brown's gas in the chamber that forms the exclusion zone gel. And to back up just a little bit, the exclusion zone is for exclusion zone. And what that means is when water comes in contact with a hydrophobic surface, it will spontaneously form a gel that is H3O2 negative. Okay? So H2O2 is hydrogen peroxide. So this H3O2 is not water, it's a gel that is formed from water spontaneously. And some people are calling that structured water, because it's not H2O. Nevertheless, we get this gel that forms spontaneously on hydrophilic surface. It turns out that virtually every surface inside your body is hydrophilic. Water loving. And so this gel forms around all your veins, arteries, and capillaries. And and of course around all of the items in your blood, like the red blood cells. The red blood cells have to go through the capillaries, but the red blood cells are twice or even 3 times as large as a liver. So they have to squeeze down and look like a hot dog if you're looking at the photos and videos online, and you can squeeze all out of shape and then go along with the capillaries and go to the other side. Well, it turns out there's 2 very important things that are going on. First of all, the heart, and you can look this up online, it's hard to find because the medical establishment doesn't like it to be known, but the heart doesn't pump enough pressure to pump blood through your system. This is a scientifically proven fact. The heart does not pump blood through your capillaries. It can't. There's not enough pressure. And it turns out that Gerald Pollack, Professor Gerald Pollack, he should really have a Nobel Peace Prize for this. I tell you, all these discoveries that came out of the University of Washington, his lab there. It turns out that when you have a very small tube, like capillary size, that has easy gel around in it, it will spontaneously start to flow fluid. Fluid will automatically start flowing with no energy input other than the formation of the easy gel itself. And it turns out the easy gel in the body is enhanced by thermal, like infrared energy. If you shine an infrared light on it, the gel layer will get thicker, okay? So it's one of the reasons that infrared energy helps our bodies, because it makes this easy gel thicker. All right, so getting back to what's happening here, anyone who understands fluid dynamics knows that fluid will always take the path of least resistance. So how come a heart pumping approximately in the middle of our chest reaches the blood, reaches even to the tips of all my fingers and toes and eyelashes everywhere in my body, gets the right amount of blood flow, every single cell. The reason is because the heart can get the blood to the capillaries, and then the capillaries themselves actually pump the blood through and then out into the veins and affect the heart. So the heart is just doing this major bulk movement, and it has enough pressure to do that, but the capillaries themselves are actually doing this. They all come reacted to easy gel. It turns out that Brown's gas is another way of making easy gel layer thicker. Oxygen doesn't do it, hydrogen doesn't do it, Brown's gas does. So when you're inhaling the Brown's gas, you're not only getting the energy, electrons, directly from this electrically expanded water, but this electrically expanded water is also helping your whole body be healthier, because actually one of the things that pumps up all of your cells is this easy gel inside the cells as well. So it's absolutely vital to life, and the Brown's gas is so that's much to get on.
So, but you also mentioned the easy gel has a negative charge, did you say?
Correct. But because it has electrons are supposed to be covered.
So that's going to play, 2 opposing charges also.
That's exactly right. I was just a quick thing too. It actually makes the surfaces extremely slippery, not only because the easy gel is as slippery as a gel, but because the negative charge on the capillaries and the negative charge on the red blood cells repel each other. So they actually slide through almost like on this maglev trains. You see what I'm saying? But the light charge is repelling. Okay, go ahead.
So there were numbers of people over the last couple times you were on who ended up obtaining the machine. So I just want to cover a couple things about usage while we're in hour 1. So for my part, my mother passed away. We had to clean 4 generations of stuff out of a house, just everything that happens when parents die. So my machine sat for some months. So clearly I need to clean it. Is there anything else I should be aware of? It's been sitting, like it ended up, it was being used daily, and then it sat for some months now. Would you advise anything?
Okay. First, I'm sorry for your loss. I lost both my parents this last year as well. I understand. I also understand how it is to go through the estates and try to clean things out. I swear my dad tried to give things away before he died, but there's still a lot of stuff to do. So I'm sorry for that for you too. I know that that's a lot. And for anybody out there, it's always good to pre-plan your exit from the planet so that you don't leave a big mess behind.
That's for sure. That is for sure. two things, and before you answer, everyone should be planning if their parents are getting older, what's going to happen. Do it now. The other thing is if you're thinking about your own life, make sure you cover the people that you love that are going to inherit whatever you leave, because it can be a nightmare. My father was meticulous, and it still was a lot to deal with anyhow. So my machine was being used, and then everything happened. It sat for months. What do I need to be aware of?
Yes, I agree on the meticulousness. The same thing's happening with my father's estate. All right, the machine sitting. Okay, when it sits, essentially nothing happens except that the live in it can crystallize. So you need to get rid of these live crystals that are in it. So first you would pour out the solution and save it, and then do multiple hot water rinses, hot tap water, just pouring in the hot tap water. It's about 1.5 liters, a quart and a half, and lifting the front and back of the machine up to about 60 degrees, so it's over 45 degrees, tipping front to back very slowly, so the water hot water can rush through all the tubings and orifices and dissolve this lye crystallization that's probably happened in there. Once all the lye is out, and you just keep dumping the hot water back in the sink as it cools, because once the water cools a little bit, it doesn't absorb or dissolve the crystals as well. So you keep putting hot water in every 2, 3, maybe 5 minutes at the most. You do that until you see that the sight tube and everything are all clean, and you can assume then that the inside of the machine is clean, and then you put your lye solution back in, top it up with distilled water, turn on the switch, and enjoy.
Okay, so he said there's a little, I don't know if you've modernized the look since I got my machine, George, but there's a little levels window. And let me give a couple tips to people that have never done this, that are going to do this. Pay attention to the amount of water, the distilled water you're going to put in. And the thing is you're going to put in the recommended amount, you're going to look at the viewer up front, and you're going to think there's not enough yet. And if you put more in, eventually it's going to work its way through the system. You're going to have put too much, the red light will come on, and you're going to have to extract. So what I learned was pay attention to the quart or whatever it is. It tells you in the directions. Put half of it in, tip the machine front and back. Put the other half of it in, tip the machine front and back. Walk away for 4 minutes, and then come look at the sight window. And that's at least on the older version that I noticed. Jason, you've been using the heck out of it. You weren't interrupted as I was. Are there things you think are helpful to add?
Do make sure you keep it clean, and always keep the water levels right where they're at. Don't overfill anything where you have water squirting out of the cannula, which is annoying. Other than that, I've had absolutely no problems with the machine whatsoever, so I know that the lye thing can be dangerous, but quite honestly, it's not a big deal. I mean, I don't expect anyone who's a listener of this show to have intellectual difficulties with cleaning and maintaining this machine.
No, the first time I set it up, I'm not the most mechanical guy in the world, believe it or not. Luckily, I married who I married. Much more mechanical than I am. But on top, there's a little device that you put Teflon tape and thread. When you do that, make sure you do a good job. If you don't, what you will notice is little specks will build up over time of the seepage. And it really isn't that big a deal. When we first did this, there were people gunning for George, and I got nervous at first. All these people saying, oh, this is the worst thing in the world, and people are dying, and just full-on attack. And I thought, what is this about? Well, I figured out what it's about over time. But setting that aside, what I realized is an responsible adult that does things right, cleans their machine. There's really, I mean, come on. I just explained to you how a melanoma almost the size of a 50% piece was going to be carved off with a scalpel, my mother's head, at 90. Will that ever heal, at 90 years old? And what about all that hair? They shave it back, but you know what happens when you cut where hair is? All that, I mean, it has the potential to be a nightmare. Over 10 days, it just peeled off and pink skin came back. Even the hair grew where the pink skin was. When she passed away, I could still see where it was, but there was none of that black or white crusty developments that you see with the melanoma. And I'm just saying that the nurse that was there, she couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. And I had to tell her, you can't go back to the hospital and start spouting off about this. I said, well, you just saw what you saw. share it with whoever you want, but I began to realize why people were putting the sniper rifle. And what was odd is they were coming at me. And so I said, look, if you got a problem with someone, why don't you email them? But I noticed they didn't, George. they kept trying to snipe through me. But to put a fine point on it, there was a lot of, it's like the legal things. Jason and I have, you know what? And I just got an email. Every time Kurt's on, you argue with Kurt, you got to knock that off, bro. What we find in the legal thing is people get very married to what they figured out. And they're proud to have figured out such complex ideas. But then it becomes almost like this is the only way that's workable. All those other people don't know what they're doing. And it's not true. And the hydrogen groups that are just doing pure hydrogen, we found the exact same thing. And it's not fair. It's not fair at all. The legal minds that are doing this, you're not giving people a fair shake, which is why we cover so many avenues and try to be thorough about it. But what I can tell you is of everything that we've had from emails and people who are in bad ways, it is almost miraculous in some cases. And then in others, like Jason is a good example, you just have your vitality. And the thing about the libido that struck me, George, was when you start losing your libido, that's kind of a sign that you're sliding down the other way now, right? You're older. You're not going up the side of the mountain. You're coming down the other side. At least that's how I take it. But it was the vigor that came with it. And with the vigor, a mental acuity, I don't really know how to describe it. It's not off the charts, but it's enough that it matters.
Yes. Okay. And the same thing has happened to me even today. Like I got up at 3:30 this morning. I get up 3:30 7 days a week. I go to bed at 8:30, something like that. And I'm usually working right up until that time, 7 days a week. How many 65-year-old men do you know can do that? 7 days a week. I'm going to be taking a vacation next week for the first time in 4 years. And my wife is really looking forward to it. And I heal so fast. And mental acuity. I find if I'm not inhaling the Brown's gas and I'm sitting into my computer for hours at a time, I start to get bored. I start to kind of doze off a little bit. I don't drink coffee, by the way. But I realize, I don't have my cannulas on. So I put on my cannulas, start inhaling the Brown's gas. Within a few minutes, we're talking 5, 10 at the most, I am alert, focused, I can help people, and the hours flow by, and I just go from one thing to the next. It's absolutely astonishing. Again, who can say that? It's incredible.
Of all the people that have come and gotten the equipment and checked it out for themselves, what kind of groups of people? Like what I've witnessed, the melanoma on the head thing alone, I never got by that. It's like, oh my God, this could be studied in labs. This could be an alternative to taking a scalpel to someone. And it's shocking that, you don't expect it to be that way. And then you start realizing how much possibility is out there in the world that is completely being ignored. But based on the amount of emails we got, I think, and maybe Rose will message me if I get this wrong, I think maybe the biggest wow, this really helped me, was people with serious breathing issues and skin issues.
I haven't really evaluated it. I get testimonials every day, as you can well imagine, because when you the testimonials that you were getting, and it really covers a spectrum. I'm going to go back to 1996, and the very first time I heard about Brown's gas being used for health in a melanoma was this guy who he had a melanoma on his forehead, almost identical to your mother. It was 3 weeks before his melanoma was gone, and he just treated it with the bubbled water. He didn't treat it with the cap and the gas. Later, another guy did that in Germany. They did that, treated the melanoma only with the Brown's gas, but with the shower cap with the gas, but no water with the hydrogenated water, the Brown's gas bubbled water. So you did both, and you had a faster healing. But back then, so already melanomas have consistently been taken off by the Brown's gas, and that's a skin. The skin is the largest organ in your body, and it also is an eliminative organ. So if you happen to be getting, for example, like you had an abscess with the teeth, a rash or something, suddenly pop up after you start inhaling the gas. That could be the skin expressing, getting rid of something that was in there, in your body, that now needed to get rid of. And the skin was the easiest way for it to do it, so it did it that way. And then once the rash is gone, your skin is healed, and away you go. In fact, the Brown's gas does a really good job of healing rashes and psoriasis and skin ailments like that. And you can imagine that anything that's happening outside the body, like your lungs are theoretically outside your body. When you're inhaling, it goes into where the lungs are, but they're still outside your body. And so is your digestive tract. In theory, when they look at it in a medical way, your digestive tract is actually outside your body. So the skin and digestive tract and the lungs, when you're inhaling and ingesting this water, are really obvious ways for things to heal. Like there's a whole bunch of people that have IBS and various kinds of digestive issues that this heals as well. So we got to remember that then it goes inside your body, because when you inhale it in the lungs, it takes it up in the blood, and it's been shown that it goes in about 15 minutes at 2% inhalation rate, your blood is saturated, and if you can keep it saturated, then it starts to deal with ailments, cancers, and nerves and all kinds of things inside your body as well. So everything you're seeing outside your body, that starts happening inside your body as well. Case in point, a woman just last week reported her stage 4 ovarian cancer was gone. In a scale, I forget exactly what they call the scale, cancer something, CA125. But if you look up that cancer antibodies, 125, CA125, I think it is. 35 is considered normal. And she had a 6 after having stage 4, which means systematic going through your body cancer starting in the ovaries. She's now to a cancer rating of 6.
Breathing, topical, drinking, what was she doing with the Brown's gas?
And that is one of the things I'm saying is that some ailments, if you look at the scientific studies, some ailments are best resolved using the bubbled water, and some are, and actually I'd say that's about 10%, and 90% are best resolved using the inhalation. But as you saw, when you use them both together, they work in synergy, and you get the best of all worlds. So that's why I always recommend both the drinking and the inhalation. In fact, one thing I want to note, as for all those people out there that are using the AquaCure and those that will, you have to be careful to drink the water, because one thing I discovered early on was that when I'm inhaling a lot, 4 hours or more a day, and I'm inhaling up to 12 hours these days, but usually about 8, I don't have a thirst. I'm not thirsty. Even if my lips start to crack from not having enough liquid water in me, I don't get thirsty. So whatever it is that causes the thirst thing in your body, if you're inhaling, it kind of takes care of that. I guess just having enough hydrogen in your body or something like that. So you have to be careful to just set up a system so that you make sure to drink your 2 or 3 quarts of water a day by habit. Just giving a little heads up there.
So Rose actually sent me a couple, and the big email backs are people who are smoking, have chronic coughs, damage from smoking cannabis or cigarettes for an entire life. We used to hack a lot, which that is done. We have examples from other people, something that could be Lance using it. But here, I should add this. Here's what I noticed, and I want to get your feedback on it. So I actually talked to you when I found out, when my mom went in and they said, oh, that's cancer on your mom's scalp, and we want to cut that off there. Well, they said 2 things. They said she's almost 90, maybe just let it go. And I was like, this, so uncomfortable, and it's going to get worse. It's on top of the head. It's just like, no, something's got to be done here. So I talked to you. When I noticed after a few days that it was probably improving, because I was thinking, did I see this or didn't I? So I start taking pictures so I can compare. After about the 4th day, when I took the sterile gauze and saturated it, I saturated it. So it was dripping saturated when I put it on the crusty, cancerous growth. And what I noticed is it saturates into that whole scab-like, carbuncle-looking, white, crusty, cancerous thing. And I did that for the rest of the days up to about 10 days-ish. So at the end, when it started to lift away, that whole thing had been softened. So it wasn't a crusty lump anymore. So what I'm saying is I saturated. I mean, it's dripping off the top of the scalp. I've put so much liquid on it.
Yes, that's exactly the way to do it. And that's the way that the guy did it in 1996 as well. But he did put it was a smaller, just like it was about the size of a dime, I'm assuming, because he just used a bottle cap and put cotton in there and soaked it, and then just kept re-soaking that cotton several times a day.
So the other thing is, I finally noticed that it just looks like a nasty cancerous scab is what it looked like. And I sent you a before and after picture. When I noticed it was lifting away, one day I got sterilized stuff and I grabbed onto the edge of it just to see, and I lifted it a little bit. Then I started saying, you know what, I don't want to make this worse, but I could see it was lifting. And then I went for a number of days more. Then I waited till the nurse who'd been coming once a week or twice a week for forever was there, and I had her there just in case. And she at first she said, I don't think you're going to be able to lift that off. And I said, but look, it's pretty much off. And she said, but all the hair is in it. And when it lifted off, it just literally did. It was, it looked moist underneath, but a day later, it was looking like pink skin. 2 days later, it just looked like pink skin. And I thought to myself, the hair will never grow back there. And it did. There were little hairs around back there. So it's every time I think about this, it blows my mind, because if I can know it and you can know it, what the hell, doctors who are supposed to be relieving the suffering of people? The choices I were given were, let it go, she's old, she's going to die. That's a miserable choice. Here's some drugs, because we're not going to touch it, and this will just dope her out so she won't think about it. And that's a horrible choice. And the other one is to cut it off. And so I'm just saying, man, to this day, it blows my mind that these options are out there. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit. Have you thought about the cymatic properties? Like lately, I've been going back and I've been doing a lot of research on solfeggio tunes, and I'm fascinated that there were originally 6 solfeggio tones known. The monks, apparently, I think, are the people that discovered it. Then another guy came and used number reduction in the way I do. 1 and 9 becomes 10. 10 is 1. So just basic number reduction. He did it with verses of the Bible, and this guy discovers another 3 solfeggio tones. So now we have 9 frequencies. And it occurred to me, after thinking about what happened with cancer, there's got to be a very beneficial resonant tone in the Brown's gas.
Well, we set it up with 432. You can set any tone you want, and it does impress on the gas, and that is a healing tone. Tone of love, 528?
528. It's one of the solfeggios as well.
Right. I found a lot of people prefer that. Actually, weren't doing as well on the 432 and switched to 528 and get blossom. So definitely, people will want to experiment with that feature of the AquaCure machine, which pretty much isn't on any straight hydrogen machine. And yet, I found it very unfortunate that the vested interest in pure hydrogen are so...
No, it was nasty. We'll just leave it at that, George. I don't want to draw fire again, but there was no cause. And believe me, I do my due diligence. I take things like this serious. And I don't appreciate people just being malicious with nothing to back it. But the other thing I would mention is what you were pointing out. You can set what's called a hertz frequency. I don't like that name. I don't like that word. Cycles per second is what we are talking about. We should have never went to hertz. Cycles per second lets you know what you're doing and what you're talking about. So instead of saying hertz, I'm going to say cycles per second. There are 9 solfeggios. You have a device on the front that's a little push button device that lets you set the rate. If you use one of those 9 solfeggios, one of the amazing things about solfeggios is if you use basic numerology breakdown, so if it was 36, you would add those together, that becomes a 9. All the basic solfeggios reduce to 3, 6, or 9. Does everyone out there remember what supposedly Tesla said were the keys to the universe, 3, 6, and 9. But what I'm telling you is they're starting to recognize and get back, like the Gregorian chants were all based on the original 6 solfeggios. They're realizing that one of them is supposed to be like DNA healing. Another one, the 528, is big. But it has to do, how can I express this? It's like the idea of, you've heard people use a mantra where it's Om. And by the way, Amen relates to that, even through the Hebrew. But in Om, the more appropriate way to think about it is not O-H-M. The more appropriate way, from my way of thinking, is A-U-M. So there's 3 parts, A-U-M, Om. And what they're saying they're doing is from the lower kind of chakras, you're lifting up into a higher consciousness. Now, the tones in solfeggio can be related in a similar way. I'm not describing this very well. My point is if you do a little work looking up solfeggios, you can absolutely set the cycles per second or the frequency rate on the gas and the water. This is a big deal, and I think as I get back into it, I'm going straight to 528 first. We used 432, by the way. Everybody listening, when we talked about the cancer on my mom's head or the dementia, we were setting on 432. But I've done a lot more research, and I'm very intrigued by 528. Jason, anything you want to get in here?
I am curious, what would the difference be between 432 and 528, other than the fact that I know they're different frequencies?
I can't answer that question. Cole can probably do a better job.
So if you look up the solfeggios, you'll see that one would be commonly known to help with depression, as an example. One would be known to supposedly repair DNA and cell structures. And by the way, there are literally 3 more solfeggios, so there's 9 now. And isn't it amazing that they had 6, now there's 9. Every one of them reduces to 3, 6, or 9. You can see what's going on here. It's amazing. And now when you begin to think back on why our musical instruments, middle A, was tuned to 440. It used to be 432. 432 is one of the solfeggios. So why did they do it? You know why they did it. And what are we talking about? They changed it by 8 cycles a second to take the positive effects off it. So the point I'm making is that we all know what cymatics is. We all know that it's how form is created. If you don't believe me, go look at someone throw sand on a plate and vibrate it, and magically geometry is formed. That is a 2D representation of form being magically made out of thin air because of a frequency rate. You can look up the solfeggios and you can see what's commonly attributed to each one. But what's more is if you have one of these devices and you're a responsible adult and you know to clean your machine and set it up properly, you can go use your intuition to examine the solfeggios and then set your machine. By the way, it was completely intuition that got me to soak the gauze and put it on my mother's head. And as I started doing it, I'm getting a little nervous. But at that point, I had pretty much given up on mainstream. All they wanted to do was drug her. That is all they wanted to do. Something's wrong here. Here's a new drug. Oh, here, give her this tougher drug that, puts her out of her misery. So she's completely doped. And then there were all these ones that they wanted to test for the dementia. Well, dementia is different in everybody. These are powerful psychotropic drugs. We'll try this one if that doesn't. And it was just this nightmare of, no, I'm done. No, I am done. But if you use your intuition, you study the frequencies, and that's how this needs to be done, by the way. This is the era we're getting into. I accept that we're in an ascending era right now. The idea in the old Hindu would be that in the dark ages that we're leaving, called the Kali Yuga, some people don't believe this. They think we're still in the Kali Yuga for another 400,000 years or something. Hope that's not right. They would say that they were at 25% virtue, human beings. In the golden age, we're at 100% virtue, which means if we are in the ascending Dwarpa Yuga, as they call it, we would be coming into 50% virtue. My main point here is adults need to get back to being adults. You need to get your intuition back, look at the problem you're having, feel your way into how you should proceed. It's more than just a feeling. And then, look at the solfeggios. But anyhow, this is me just talking, I guess. Did you have anything else to... Go ahead.
You're absolutely correct in all of that. And as people learn what's going on and they see this manifesting in reality, this stuff that science, it's funny, there's scientists that say, if we can't measure it, it doesn't exist. As an inventor, working with stuff that can't be measured, but quite obviously exists, well, even gravity, they didn't measure it, if you will, until Newton got knocked on the head with an apple, kind of thing. So, and as far as hydrogen for health, it was over 100 years ago. I wish I had immediate access in my archives to these studies, where they were using hydrogen for healing over 100 years ago. And then modern medical science just kind of ignored it and went on with the drugs and stuff.
But we had the 1900s, the Rockefellerization of everything.
Yeah.
And by the way, I got to make a mention, or I'm going to be seeing comments. The gravity comment is a prime example of scientism at its best. If you honestly want to look at such things, you have to admit that that is a theory based on a theory. So at what point did we come to the day where we've been living in a world where everything falls every day, and all of a sudden we need to invent a force and some math to get behind it? Instead of just saying things fall, we invent this whole other structure that up until this day cannot be called a law. And actually they're starting to straddle the border. And I say all that just to save us, because we've covered this a few times. But the importance of your ability to set the cycles per second, or what is called a Hertz rate, also makes what you've got going on here a unique offering. And from my point of view, and my point of view is very limited, I study what interests me. I think if you just zeroed in on the solfeggios alone, I don't think you can go wrong there. And that's also based on the provable work of Dr. Emoto. Has Emoto influenced you at all?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, it was one of the things I was going to bring up next. The memory of water, and not only Emoto, but a whole slew of science where they impress certain energies into water, frequencies and other emotions and things, and then use it to grow plants or make animals better, all that kind of thing. The very fact that we have thanks for our food. When you eat your supper, when you eat your food, you just put gratitude into that food, you will get more nutrition out of that food.
Perfect.
It's insane. I say insane, crazy, good. It's amazing. And maybe that's a better word for it.
Let's express why. I mean, it's one thing to say that, but for someone who has nothing to attach that anchor to, let's point out why that is. I mean, basically what Emoto did tells us that what you're saying is knowably true. Let's let folks know. And this is the power of intention. It's like this. How many people in your life do you know that always have bad luck and they're always miserable? Woe is me. It's Emoto is proving why that's true. It's because they're attracting their own negative vibe that they're emitting out into the world. People like my mother, I don't think I ever saw my mother until she had dementia mad, ever, in my whole life. I used to drive down the road, I'd pass her, and she wouldn't see me, and she'd be smiling as she drove. She attracted that her whole life. So let's just point it out that your intention is the basis of Emoto's work. You want to explain it?
From my point of view, you are absolutely 100% correct. People are often their own worst enemy, including myself. And I have to keep reminding myself of this sort of thing because I know it to be true. You will attract what you give out. It just flat out. That's one reason why you don't want to respond to anger or negativity with anger and negativity. The best way to cancel it out is to give it the opposite. And if a person can remember that, which often I don't, and have a gratitude in life, like just go through life thinking how thankful you are for everything that you have, your life will be amazing. And it isn't just because you're not looking for anything more, which quite often you're not if you're in such a gratitude state of mind. More things will come to you, and you will be more of an instrument of the universe to do all this good in the world. So it is your intention and the way you react to things, which you can choose your reaction. Something bad happens to you, you can choose how you feel about it and what you do about it. It is absolutely a choice that we can make as spirit to express through these organic bodies of ours.
So, George, we're coming into the top of the hour. Jace just pinged me. Let me wrap up here real quick. For those who have never heard of Dr. Emoto, which proves so much, in the same way a cymatic plate proves how form is created, what Emoto did is he turned around and said water has memory. And by the way, your attention can be bedded in it. Then he turned around and proved it. You can see where someone intuited love at water, and he froze it and made a beautiful geometry. Someone else intuited I hate you, and it was this nasty blobby shape. He got Buddhist monks who were practiced meditators to meditate over polluted water. It's all out there for you to go and look, and I couldn't agree with George more. To take this life for granted is a mistake. To be grateful when you sit down to eat, to give thanks, it changes everything. But let me, as we wrap up hour one, if you go to the website, up in the top navigation, there is a link called Sponsored. Click on it. Go all the way down to George Wiseman's link if you are seeking to get one of these devices. That is a sponsored link that he made specially for us the first time he was on. It gets you like 400 or 500.
Сейчас бы чай, а у нас опять одна водка. Мутанты, говорят, опять кого-то ночью утащили. Покемарить, что ли? Или попозже? Я, кажется, спину потянул. Болит, блин. Сейчас бы кино какое глянуть. Интересно, что в киношках сейчас крутят?
Держитесь там!
Перебьем этих.
The fuck is that? Alright, I'm gonna call that good for today.
Весело у нас в зоне, конечно. То военные голодные игры с зомбированными устроят, то снег внезапно весной выпадет. Чудеса, да и только.
Эх, парни, хорошо живем все. Твою ж налево. Это что у меня на комбезе дырка? Чёртовы тушка.
Alright, aloha, and thanks to everyone who showed up.